All right, we're here. It's not viewer Q&A. We're not doing that. There we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's, or I guess it shouldn't even be this week's episode of the Plat Perspective. It's just this episode of the Plat Perspective. It is a very, very special episode I have with me. The great HiRez Ajax and HiRez PonPon, two of the game designers on SMITE that pick up the pieces and put them all together and create this great game that we all love so much. So first of all, thanks to these guys. I don't know if you guys know, and I kind of alluded to it in my Reddit post, but these are two of some of the hardest working guys over at HiRez. Every time I've talked to Ajax to try and get this running, he and Pon have been in or out of the office until the wee hours of the morning, trying to find ways to make this game more enjoyable for you guys to play. So super huge thanks to both of you guys for taking the time out of your personal time when I'm sure the last thing you want to do is talk about SMITE to continue talking about SMITE. I know when I come home from work and I get texts from my customers and things like that, the last thing I want to do is keep talking about work. So again, I really appreciate it. I know the community really appreciates it. And I think people have a lot of questions that they want asked, and it seems like a good format to do it. So with that, just as a background to everybody who's joining, this is typically this podcast or stream or episode or whatever you want to call it is typically very new player focused, right? You know, there's plenty of content out there. If you're a diamond player, a high plat player, masters, grandmasters, there's plenty of pros to learn from to get better. There are plenty of resources to really fine tune your game, but there's not a lot in the way of kind of teaching to the new or inexperienced player base. So we try and keep the topics around here focused on that. And with that, we've got a lot of kind of new player friendly or very basic informational questions that I polled the community on to squeeze some information out of Pon and Ajax and make the game a little bit more friendly for new players. Yeah, when will you move artists to server maintenance? That's a good one. So
that's clumsy. Awesome.
Let's start with that, right? I think that's the first question, and the big thing that most people don't understand about game design or just general business, right, is like, what's everybody's role? What are you responsible for? What are you not? For those of you just joining and who have no idea what a video game is like, Ajax and PonPon are not the guys that are plugging in the servers and keeping the lights on in the data center, right? So that's like a whole. So don't yell at them. But can you guys talk a little bit about, like, what's your role as a developer? I know Ajax, yours as a lead is a little bit different. Pon, yours is a little bit different as well. You've done a little bit of game design and whatnot. And let's talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like from a ground level up.
Yeah, so basics of game development. There are three real core components. You have artists, programmers or engineers, and designers. Pretty much every game studio needs all three of those. So, of course, we're on the design side.
I said design. I meant develop. Or sorry, I said develop. I meant design.
Developers is a general term, right?
Right.
For developer, designer, not equivalent. Developer could refer to any of those three types that I just referred to.
Gotcha.
So me and Pon are members of the design team. So as lead design, I have a little bit more outreach with the other teams than maybe Pon does as a game designer. But our core goals are to keep adding things to the game that players find fun and interesting. So the biggest things and easiest ones to describe are God balance patches. Our team manages those. New gods, god design, their abilities, their kit, how they're going to attack. And we take a pretty lead role on god design. So even from an artistic and implementation standpoint, the designer is really in charge of all that. And then we work on, just other types of features, which Pon has done earlier, like progression and events and things like that. So those are the main three things that a game designer at HiRez would work on. But man, we do a lot of other random stuff. Pon and I spend a lot of our time talking to the community, listening to, reading feedback, and then chasing down the proper people to get stuff fixed. And it helps that me and Pon have been on the team for quite a while because we know the right people to go to and just be nice to them and get them a nice, clear task sent over, and they'll get that stuff fixed for us.
Yeah, this morning we were doing trying to solve that whole soul gem issue. We had to disable soul gem, and so I was giving them information because I actually had the games crash on me with that case, and so I was working with the programmers a little bit just to try and get that fixed, help them fix it sooner. So We do random stuff like that all the time.
So it was causing
also
game
just in
crashes.
meetings.
That was the big question mark. Is like everybody knew it got removed, but anyway, I don't know if you're allowed to
Yeah.
share or not. But
I mean, it's okay.
I mean, it's,
Yeah,
it's whatever.
it was possibly being a big part of the crashes.
sure. Awesome. So God design, adding new features and balancing current features, right? I mean, I guess is that
The
a
big
good-
three.
the big three, and then a lot of other stuff in between.
Yeah, general upkeep and bug fixing are important too.
How much involvement with like, I guess you guys like you observe the community a lot, right? Like, Ajax, I think you were telling me that one of your favorite things to do when you get in early is to look at Reddit and look at all the new posts and see if you can crush a bug out, while you're sitting there, or spot something out, or I mean, how much of your job is like community driven work, or is it mostly internally influenced?
No, we do a lot of community, like a lot. And I worked at a previous company that the community wasn't so engaged in the game, and it was for a younger age group, so people aren't just like talking about it online all the time. And the difference is night and day. Like HiRez is extremely focused on what the community's talking about, which parts they like, which parts they don't like. So I mean, we'll use that to influence our decisions on a daily basis. But sometimes we just come up with stuff on our own that we know we like, or we'll have an internal meeting and talk about, our favorite games we're currently playing and lessons we're learning from GDC talks and stuff like that. We'll come up with other features, but I'd say definitely on a daily basis we're relying on the community to help us plan and find out what people like.
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of, I don't want to go like off the track here, but without naming names, like, have you guys seen kind of the recent community responsiveness for other incredibly successful games and taken any lessons from that, or have you guys always kind of been doing that? I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Like the big game that literally everyone's playing right now that has instant developer feedback across all three of those categories that you mentioned. Basically something becomes popular on Reddit.
Yeah,
Yep.
so it's that's something like when I was on the community team, even that was always something we were trying to do. Is one, we always want to just improve our ability to communicate with the community and give them what they want, and balancing realistic expectations with what we can do with what people want us to do is always something that's a struggle. And so different studios take different approaches. Oftentimes we'll look at other studios and see what they're doing and see if that process is appropriate for us. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, and we can look to improve. But in general, the general goal is, what are we doing right now? What can we be doing better? And that's pretty much for all departments, not just community.
That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, me and Pon, I mean, we're big gamers on our own. So whenever I'm playing a new game that I'm really hooked on, you can guarantee I'm checking that subreddit, and I'm getting a feel for how the community is, how their developers interact with them. And I've played games where I don't hear very much from the developers. Sometimes that's okay. And, I've played games that I love that I don't really hear from the developers much, like Monster Hunter or something like that. But then I've played other games where, like Path of Exile, where I see them replying all the time. And everybody has their own style to it, and I think HiRez, we have our own style too, and we just try to be like real people is really our main go-to, especially guys like me and Pon. Just try to talk to people in the most honest way that we possibly can.
Yeah, like jumping on some no-namer stream and talking about the game.
I love just jumping in a random stream and just chatting to people, and they're like, "You're not real, Ajax. Get out of here."
Yeah, having to try and prove that you're actually PonPon is always a fun task.
I had that happen to me last night. I jumped into somebody's chat and they were like, "Wait a minute, are you?" But no. Anyway, so I guess that's kind of brings up a funny question. It's like, when you guys play other games, do you guys view that as like competitive intel and research, or is it just like a gamer just taking in a different experience? Like, how do you guys like? I almost feel like if I was in that position, I would I'd be like picking apart every single I wouldn't be able to enjoy playing other games. You know what I mean?
It's a weird dynamic, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you felt it now. Like Pon probably felt it more recently because he moved a little bit from departments. But when you're a professional game designer, I'd say every game you play is research or homework, or like you're earning XP points for literally playing any game ever, which is really cool because it makes you super engaged in gaming even more, because you get twice of the benefit from it. Like, I get to just have fun, and I also get to learn. And I definitely think that, I haven't had any problems where I don't think my game design knowledge has really made me dislike a game that I would have liked anyway. sometimes I just notice things. And I'm just like, oh, that's odd. I wonder why the designers did that. That doesn't really make sense to me. But it doesn't never really like ruined my time.
I have this mental image of Pon throwing a controller through a window, just going like, "How the hell did that get out of QA?" You know?
Nah, it's,
Right?
I've actually had
Anything
to
were
like,
the opposite, right?
yeah, I had to kind of, with a lot of games I played, especially after game design, I was very focused on trying to really learn lessons from that, like the games I was playing, and it got to a point where I kind of had to like take a break and sometimes just play a game and just not try and absorb it because it got so frustrating sometimes because you'd be sitting there like trying to analyze everything and you weren't even focusing on the game anymore. You couldn't get sucked in. Like with Ni no Kuni is what I'm playing right now. I played probably the first 10 to 12 hours of that just playing it. And now that I'm starting to get towards the end game, now I'm looking back on things that they did and seeing like what kind of cool stuff they did. They have a lot of like interacting systems, and seeing how they interact is really cool. And it's like with like Smite, right? When I was a professional level player, there's a certain amount of knowledge you have that makes the game way more interesting once you really, really dive into it. And so when you start looking into a game and trying to analyze it and see what it does, and you go, oh man, that was a really cool decision they made, it makes you appreciate it a bit more. So it can help you appreciate a game more, but it can also be very frustrating trying to sit there and just do homework while you're trying to have fun with a video game.
It's funny to me that Pon kind of said it backwards the way I think about it, because I think of like whenever I play a new game, when I first start playing it, I'm like much more critical and like paying attention to the things it did and like what I like and what I don't like about it. Right. And when I get like really sucked into a game that I've played a lot and I just go back and play it anyway, that's when I know I'm not learning anything here, but I don't care because I just want to put more hours into this game because this is like especially relaxing and fun, and I know there's nothing more to learn, but I don't really care. That's just an interesting personal preference, I guess.
Yeah, my problem is if I don't get hooked into the game for like the first 4 hours, then I'm never going to get hooked into it. And so if I'm trying to analyze it, I probably won't get hooked in at all.
No, it makes sense. All right, we'll move along here. Question number 2. Yeah, so I guess this is everybody's big question, right? How do you design the game for the pro players versus the new players, right? Between the pro scene and even the minor league, you got like what, a total of 150 players, maybe 200 that are, influencers in the state of the game at high level play versus the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that exist on another plane, right? Like, you think about like certain gods that you just never see at low elos because they're just absolutely impossible for a new player to pick up or play well or things like that. Like, how do you guys manage the balance between the two? Because obviously, if you tune something for one, it becomes unviable for the other or OP in the other, right? Like, I'm sure you guys could give Anubis more mobility and Ajax would be incredibly happy, but then, he'd be first pick, first ban, and everybody would be throwing a fit about him, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. I will say that. It's not easy. Couple things to remember, I guess, just before we even go further into discussion, is just that the difference, like you mentioned, the difference between your average casual arena player and your SPL player is a extremely different type of person in their game preference, the other types of games they play, their timing, their age, their skill, their interest is just very different types of people. So it can be tough to just design a game for a wide audience already. That could be pretty tough.
Right.
And it's also important to note that a lot of times people, I guess they get kind of echo chambered when they're talking about their favorite games. You talk to you're in like a big community and you're using the subreddit or your streamers and stuff like that, and it seems like a lot of people. So when like you all agree on something, it seems like, oh man, like everybody thinks this, but it's really still just a small piece of the pie. Like there are so many players out there that are not jumping on Reddit or interacting on Twitch TV and stuff like that might have completely different opinions than you. So we try to like always keep that in mind, that even when something feels like a hyper majority, that we need to make sure we consider all types of players.
Sure. And and I think you have the vocal ones and then you have the population, right? So you got to do like a balancing act between. Even if everybody on Reddit agreed on the same thing, it's still a fraction of the overall player population, right?
There's the term vocal minority, and it gets thrown around probably way too much because not everything is always a vocal minority. But that's the general idea, right? Is you get a whole bunch of people, they're all talking about the game, they all come to the similar conclusions because they all kind of have established things that they think are fact.
Mhm.
And so when it comes to them conveying their ideas, they're working off that foundation that may not be actually true for the whole player base. Sometimes it is, they totally match the rest of the player base, but sometimes it is that kind of echo chamber or vocal minority type of thing that happens.
So those are the things we keep in mind when we're designing. Now, how we actually do the design work that works for multiple audiences, I think Smite does in a couple really good ways. One, probably the easiest thing and one thing that's clearly different about Smite than other games is our game modes. You know, we have Arena and we have Conquest. They're very different experiences, and there's very different types of people that enjoy them. And that is one thing that's really good for new players and veteran players alike, is for a game to have options like that. It lets people onboard themselves into the game a little easier. They can play Arena, they can figure out how the gods handle, they can figure out what kind of play style they like, and really just kind of throw abilities at each other. And then once if they get that craving for more, you know, some players are perfectly happy to stay there, and we're totally cool with that. But if they give that craving for more, they can branch out into other game modes. They can start interacting more with the community. They can go out and seek additional knowledge on how to optimize their builds and leveling order and things like that. So there's really, like, you can play Smite at a relatively simple level and have a lot of fun, but having a lot of room to grow into the game is kind of what's really important to hook the pro audience as well, or the more hardcore.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that. That's my exact experience. I think I put in like 300 or 400 hours of playing Odin in Arena on PlayStation before I ever touched Conquest. And
I think MOBAs have like this general nice curve to them where, like, even if things are relatively similar and there's not too much character depth, there's a ton of like depth when it comes to how do certain matchups play or how do item builds affect things. And so even without doing too much like on the god design part, I would expect that there's a lot of room for like growth between an average player and a pro player just naturally. Especially when, like, there's a difference between when you're playing like Anubis and just trying to combo someone versus you're playing Anubis and you're trying to bait out cooldowns so that you can actually land the wrap and know that you're going to be able to confirm the ultimate. Like the different level of I'm just throwing out abilities versus I'm waiting for things so I can time things and actually execute is a whole different game.
Oh yeah, I still remember distinctly playing Smite in closed beta, and I was very new to the game and was just kind of getting the basics down. And like the first time I was playing Sobek and I was running away from an Anubis and I heard the mummy wrap coming from like my back right side, and I swerved left and it went right past me, and I was like, oh my god, this game is amazing. Those are things that take time to learn, and I think we do a pretty good job in the god design as far as making our abilities. They have a relatively understandable kind of surface level of design. Like, okay, this is an area effect, I throw it out there, it deals damage or heals, whatever. But then they have depth. All of our abilities are actually pretty complex when you look at other games. Like, our abilities have multiple effects, and people who really learn to use those, the difference between an Osiris player that just tries to stun people and chase them down and the Osiris player that's like tethering multiple enemies to peel damage for his entire team, like, that's a huge difference. And they're still hitting the ability and they're still using it fine, but those are still two very different cases that one takes a lot more skill to do properly.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you guys are, at least, and this is just my personal observation, is it's been really cool to see the evolution from season 3 to season 4 to season 5, where it almost felt like in season 3 and 4, it didn't matter what game mode you played, if you weren't using an optimal build of like the same 7 items, like, you were behind by a significant margin. Like, if you didn't build Rada Tahuti on a mage, like, you were, versus somebody who did, like, you were in trouble, like, in a big way, right? And so I think it's been really cool to see the evolution into season 5 where, I could be a new player and just build whatever the hell I want, and I'm still going to sling out damage and truck people, right? Like, maybe it's not necessarily mathematically the best route, but, it's to the point where almost everything's viable, so that it's, you don't feel like you're just getting whomped on every single game because you don't know the right build path or whatever. So I think, credit to you guys for that. I think, that was it sounded like that was a major objective of you guys, moving from one season to the next. So, but I've definitely seen it. There's a lot more variety now. People can get a lot more creative.
Yeah, blessings, actually. That was like one of the big goals. Blessing was, especially new players, they can look at something and go, I'm an assassin. I built Assassin's Blessing. It says I should go kill jungle camps. I'm going to go do that.
Yeah, it was our kind of subtle way of building a conquest tutorial into every game. But yeah, thank you for that. And I think, this is not necessarily wasn't a goal just for season 5, but a goal we always have in design, which is diversity, right? We want diverse item builds. We want diverse god picks. We want to be make sure lots of things are viable in lots of different ways. So I'm glad that season 5 seems to be going well in that regard. But that's another thing. As long as we can promote that diversity in our design, that's going to be better for new players because they're not going to fall into traps. Like you did make a little example earlier where you said that like there's a couple gods that you just don't see very much at low levels because people think they're just too hard. And I think actually we don't see too much of that. We see the new players experiment with a lot of things and they do pretty okay with everything, especially if it's something they get comfortable and they learn at. It's really at the higher end where there's certain stigmas against certain gods that players just do not think are competitively viable. And you see more actually constraining up there. So it's good. I think it's good design that Smite has done over the years that most of our characters you can just pick up and play when you're relatively new to the game, and you can be successful, especially if you dedicate yourself to that character to really learn its ins and outs. I think that's one of the most important things, which I know we have another question later where we'll talk about that. But
yeah, absolutely, and we'll get into it a little bit later on the god design side of things. So just to echo that, I think it's really cool that you take gods like Achilles or Ardeo, where like you could sit there and spam your abilities, but if you really take the time to figure out what everything does, like you're gonna be a force to be reckoned with. Versus it's still viable even if all you're doing is smashing buttons, right? So it's kind of neat. Or where you take that as an example, and you look at a god like Serket, where if you don't have a full understanding of her kit, you're not going to do anything, right? Like you're not. I don't.
Serket is a good example of a god that is difficult for new players, yes,
right.
But she doesn't do terribly.
Sure.
She's still playable, but she's definitely an example of one of the tougher ones for new players, for sure.
Yeah. Sure, and I'm just talking like from a mechanical potatoes perspective, right? Like I felt like learning how to play Serket was difficult for me, right? And it took a while, and I had to understand her skills and her passive and how everything worked. And so, that was versus a lot of these other gods where, like you said, it seems like the latest design has been more around gods where like the base level's great, but then there's like the fine tuning of your ability with that god is also there to make you really powerful force. But we'll get into that a little later with some of the other gods. Let's get to the next question so we don't keep you guys on here all night.
It's all good, man.
Oh, this is my favorite question. When should I start playing ranked? I'm a brand new player. I just finished my 3rd Conquest game ever. I played Scotty solo and split push the whole game, went all the way to the Phoenix. Everybody and their mother is telling me never to play ranked. But from like a developer and designer perspective, when do I start playing ranked? Like when do you get in there? I mean, I think the internet would teach us that like, oh, you need 300 hours of casuals or, this many gods mastered. And I think, that dilutes the pool, but also at the same time, it's good to know what you're doing before you jump in where people are really serious. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah. So I think the first question is, do you want to play ranked? Because ranked is a very specific mindset, right? Like you can be totally happy playing casual conquest, where ranked conquest is more for, I really want this kind of progression feel of laddering and climbing up and competing against potentially the best players. So I think just shoving people towards that, if that's not what they want to do, is a mistake. And so I see some people being like, if you're not playing ranked, you're not playing conquest. It's like, no, they're still playing conquest. It's just not the most competitive version of it. So I think that has to be answered first. And then after that, really once you get a basic grasp of conquest, like hit level like 15 to 30, go through, play a few games of conquest, make sure that you're feeling good about it. Once you feel like you're confident enough, go in. And if you qualify poorly, you qualify poorly. That's why there's bronze, silver, gold, plat, diamond, masters, grandmasters. And those players should be there because the more they fill out the pool of those lower ranks, the more that it helps matchmaking as a whole in all of ranked. And so if someone doesn't do well on your team and they're going down to like bronze, silver, gold, well, there needs to be people down there. And so discouraging them from playing is probably a mistake, if I had to guess.
Yeah. Those are good points from Pon. I think the number one most important thing is it should be a personal decision when you feel ready for it or you want a different type of challenge. That's really when you should think about, okay, am I ready for it? And even if you're not ready for it, if you really want to, we don't want to discourage you from that. The rank system will adjust you for that reason, right? We have a couple limitations in place to make sure players have some understanding of the game before they jump into ranked. And then we have, a lot of systems in the game to make sure that players can move up or down accordingly. So it's good to play ranked if you want to, but I definitely think it's a dangerous issue to just try to push people into it. That's gonna cause frustration more than it's gonna cause fun.
So I mean, it kind of almost sounds like, you know, you get some experience in your belt and you go in if that's the kind of competitive environment you're looking for. So, you know, people who qualify into those brackets, you know, shouldn't feel bad about themselves. It just means that they have a lot of opportunity to learn. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, I mean,
I mean, even that, you don't even have to necessarily feel like you need opportunity to learn. You can just prefer the pick ban system. Maybe you just don't like blind pick very much and you're very happy to stay in your silver gold range and just play the game slightly differently and not have to get super serious. That's totally fine. And I'm sure there are players out there that do that, and go 50-50 in their wins. And, you know, as long as you're trying your best to win the game and you're not actively being mean or trolling your teammates, then by all means, go play.
Yeah, I think I would just distinguish, like, what I would say is, like, ready is if you just want to play ranked, I think you can go in there with a pretty low-level understanding. It's probably good to play Conquest a bit beforehand because it's going to help you it's going to help reduce frustration of your teammates and make for a better experience for you overall. But if you're trying to get to, if you're trying to be a Masters level player, then you should have a ton of experience, a ton of hours in Conquest. You should probably have at least mastered every god just so you understand how they work. And so, like, the difference between just, hey, should I play ranked versus, hey, I'm trying to get Masters, what should I do to get that, are probably two different questions that I think sometimes cross wires when they really shouldn't.
cool. No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's useful. So if you're just kind of skipping to this part of the video, go for it. Get some experience under your belt. Learn a little bit about Conquest. Do your research. If you want to get better, the people who get better are the ones who watch streams and know their gods and know their matchups, and yeah, dive right in. So don't be discouraged if you qualify low. Just look at it as an opportunity to get better and understand the game better.
As long as you have a good attitude and just play your best and be positive with people and not quit games halfway through them, you're gonna do better over time anyway. It's just gonna happen.
Yep. All right, next. All right. This is a quick answer. You guys don't have to spend too much time on this. What's one thing that you'd like to personally tell every single new player? Like the one thing, like your message to a new player. I literally downloaded this game today off the PlayStation Store because it's free and you get a God bundle if you sign up, or it's free with PlayStation Plus. I'm just starting, and this is Ajax's message to me. What is it? Like, what's the one thing you want them to know?
I mean, the one thing I want you to know is to find the god that really fits your playstyle. If that means trying a couple, whatever, or if you just need to look at the god visually and be like, yep, I like that. That's cool. I'm just gonna learn that. That's fine. Whichever way you want to do it. I think the most important thing for new players is just finding that one god that really speaks to them. It could be visual, it could be play style, it could be their personality. There's so many different reasons that someone might like a god, but when you find that one, I think that really just increases your chances of really enjoying the game and really being dedicated to it.
Yeah, that was gonna be my answer, so I'll pick something different because that was actually all my friends' experience. One person played Sobek, I played Arachne, I think Caps played Vimana a ton early on. We just found like the one character we liked and we played it a ton, and then once we were ready to branch out, we were hooked. And really figuring out what character you like playing and starting to play a few games with them to get a feel for them will really help you grasp the fundamentals of Smite. Mm-hmm. I think the only other thing I would say is don't be afraid to try and find friends and play with friends. Because just in general, having someone like that has your back while you're learning is a good experience. I think that's probably an important thing, is try and find someone who's also new and be like, hey, let's learn this together. Because I think multiplayer games like this can be really fun together.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's just people through the in-game chat you never really to or everything, just you see someone who is positive and played about as well as you on the team, add them to party and queue up again.
Yeah, actually, one of my groomsmen was a guy I met playing. It was kind of Destiny and Smite, and we both kind of ran into each other. And turned out he lived nearby. We grabbed drinks one day and hit it off. We were great friends. So I could definitely speak to that. And I think that playing one god thing is really important at all levels of play, not just like when you're starting out and you're playing arena. Like one of the things, like when I don't want to call it coaching because it's definitely not. I'm not nearly experienced enough to be doing that. It's more like guiding right into a basic level of play. It's, you know what, pick one god in every role and just whatever you're forced into that role, your last pick in your ADC, your last pick in your support, your last pick in your solo or whatever it is, like play that god and only that god that speaks to you, even within the role, right? I mean, I think at a base level, pick one god, that you really like. For me, it was Odin. I had 2,500 worshippers on Odin before I ever played a single other god. But I think even when you move into Conquest, that's important because when you know the mechanics and you know how far you can be, how far you can leap, when you're in trouble, when you're not, you can focus a lot more on the game at large versus your individual button presses, which makes you learn even that much quicker, right? So I think that's certainly an important thing for new players. And I'm glad you guys brought it up because that's one of the number one things I tell people is don't try and like follow the meta or Kukulkan got nerfed, so I got to play this, or pick one god that can hold their own in whatever role it is and just beat the hell out of it.
Yeah, the less brain power you have to use trying to figure out, do I need to hit 1, 2, 3, or 4 now? And the more you can focus on just the bigger game, the better.
This is like the first thing, try to find that one god that really speaks to you. That's really for the new players, right? But of course, team comp is really important, and learning how other gods work is really important too. So once you do get that mastery of that one god, it's definitely worth it to branch out a little bit and try some new gods. But hey, like if you're a support main like me playing, I never had to force myself into anything else for quite a while because it's pretty easy to play support all the time. But don't want to discount the importance of learning the whole team comp experience, but I still think for the very newest players, the most important thing is just finding that character that really interests you in for whatever reason it interests you. Just find that character.
I think and part of that is playing with other people, right? Because when you play with other people, you naturally fall into this like desire to blow shit up, right? Like, I think that's an important thing to note, right? Like when I'm just thinking back to like my personal experience when we started in Arena, right? Like I was playing Odin, my buddy was playing Ho Yi. We had another friend that joined us, and he was like, "Hey guys, like I'm not sure what to play. I want to kill a bunch of people." I was like, "Oh, play Poseidon, right?" And we're stacking ults on top of each other against people who don't even know what beads are, with like Ares, Odin, Poseidon, Ho Yi, and just smashing people apart. So you naturally fall into that mode of, "Hey, I'm gonna, let's try and team comp this up." The more that you play with other people, right, is how can we synergize each other's kits?
Yeah, and you do build your own team comp, then you don't get in that situation where you have to switch roles because you're a support main and then 3 guardians just got locked in. I mean, that's not a very realistic scenario, but that happens. Those kinds of things happen.
Yeah, I want to live in that world.
Start learning a hunter. You start learning a hunter, and you only play hunters, and you get into a lobby, and there's 3 hunters. It really is the best thing for your team to try to pick a mage or something instead. But
yeah,
hey, if you really have no idea how to play mages, just keep playing the god that you know, and just do your best for a little while until you get into the game further. For the early levels, that's fine.
Sounds good. That's awesome. Thanks, guys. It's good advice. All right, question 5. Any plans to improve accessibility for new players? I mean, I think we kind of covered this already a little bit, but it sounds like this is like a constant, like, continuous forward improvement thing for you guys. Like, it doesn't sound like, in some, I don't want to call it dev cycles, but it's like, all right, today we're going to focus on this and balance, and then tomorrow it's what are we doing for new players? And things kind of tend to come in waves, but I don't know that I've gotten that from the way you guys operate. It always seems like you are, looking towards accessibility. But I think, Pon, you were saying as of late, like that's one of your roles and responsibilities is the new player playing the game, or can you expand on that?
Some of it. So we've already done a few things, like we changed some level requirements early on for queues so that players generally go to the queues that like they're going to have more success in. They're going to have more opportunity to do cool things. Arena is a big one of those where you just kind of go into a death match. Team comp doesn't matter so much, and you get to have fun there. Things like the items being in-game tutorials, like the blessings, are a big thing for players because you can sit there and throw a tutorial at them, but if they just kind of skip through it and it's not that intense, you really don't get the feel for the game unless you're actually in it fighting other people. And so things like those in-game items helping out, guiding them towards like what their role is supposed to do or what things they can do is really helpful because they can learn why they play. And I think that's one of the big things that we try and do is make sure that players can learn why they play. And then we do other things in the back, like small quest tweaks, the new player rewards to make sure that they feel like they're constantly able to like unlock new characters or try new things. That's why like the free god things are in there. So we're just doing like tweaks over time to really improve accessibility for them. And I think you put it a good way, which is we look at like one specific thing and then go, okay, let's improve this aspect of it because that'll have a tangible improvement. And then we'll go look at a separate thing that might have a tangible improvement to help new players get into the game and have a good time.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I mean, you can go and look at all sorts of GDC talks and textbooks and stuff written about tutorials and new player experience. You'll still talk to 100 game designers and you'll find 100 different opinions. And different things work very differently for different types of games and different types of audiences, or even games within the same genre can have very different new player experiences, and they could both work for the game depending on how, the tone of your game and just things like that. So we have to think about ways we can streamline the whole experience and just make it feel better for everyone. And a lot of times that translates well to new players. A lot of times when people ask this question, all they think about is like more tutorial, more. And the truth is, in many cases, less is more. Like, players want tutorials to teach people to beads Ares ult at the last time in their first match, and that just information overload. Like, no, you can run the test with 100 new players and one of them might actually take a lesson from that and apply it later, right? It's just, there's a lot of things in the game like Smite. It's difficult, it takes time. So really what we try to do is just make sure that the game itself is appealing to them in a more general sense, so lots of different characters, lots of different play styles, mechanics like the third person action mechanics that are relatively accessible on their own. Like, oh, you're like, okay, I've played a game where I run around in third person and hit people with stuff, right? You learn that. Those type of more broad things really help players get in, and then as they get in and learn and they play and they practice, they decide, their own path, what type of player they want to be, what type of modes and gods they want to be, and we give them the tools to grow into that.
Pon, you agree?
Let's see.
Yeah.
Another comment here, just like ensuring that description abilities are complete. Like, a new player does not care about that at all. Like, that is not a new player accessible feature at all. A new player accessible feature is actually shortening description ability, so it just says like deals damage in a line. Like, that's all a new player needs to know. Having something like, oh, and that damage does 23% of your magical power scaling over time, and if your target was hit with the number 2 before hitting the number 1, they take additional damage for the next 3 seconds. Like, new players do not need that information. They simply won't use it even if they had it.
Yeah. Right.
So they need time to learn that depth. And this is a difficult thing. It's just like when we had the first design point about people wanting more information on things, is something we get from veteran players all the time. But we really strive to write our ability descriptions and item descriptions in a way that is clear but succinct. We really can't just jam every bit of text and every single possible interaction into that text box, because new players are going to look at that and just their eyes are just going to roll. They're just not even going to try.
Oh, I know, like all the people complaining that Kwang's immunity frames in his ult was never in a description or anything like that, and I'm like,
so
all right.
Yeah, one thing we've wanted to do for a while is have the ability to toggle between those types of things. It's just that's a lot of dev time, and another, just, this is a bit of a tangent I'm on now, but one of the plights of the game designer is like, there's a million things that Pon and I wish we could do for the game. Like, we have a list a mile long. We want to do them all, but we have to really carefully pick and choose our priorities. And sometimes those priorities are just what we think is going to be the most impactful. And sometimes they're just those priorities are dictated by what other teams, what other groups of developers we have to work with us on things.
Right.
So it's like, that's a very difficult part of our jobs, is just picking out of that list of 100 things, what are we going to do next? And we spend quite a bit of time trying to make that decision.
Yeah, I think the additional point there is, because I came from a background where I taught some people in both Smite and like WoW, because those are the two games I was competitive in. And when you're teaching someone that like is very into the game, you can use high level terms and mechanics to describe things that they can understand. But I remember my fiance, she might hate me for telling this story, is I tried to teach her Smite. And so I'm teaching her things like, oh yeah, when this person jumps on you, just activate your beads Aegis, and then once that's done, throw this down and ult, right? And someone jumped on her and she died. And I was like, well, why didn't you do any of that stuff? And she was like, well, I couldn't figure out how to bring up my targeter. And it's like, it's that level of stuff that, like, especially very, very new players, getting their feet wet, getting that to understand. And then so once they get that kind of grasp of fundamentals, they can look into the ability and go, it does this. Once I know it does this, I can use this. It's really once you start getting more and more experience, you can start actually caring about things like these interact in this way, and if they interact in this way, it's better because X, Y, and Z reason. For very, very new players, I would say even up until like level 15, 20, maybe even a bit longer, simpler things, simpler concepts are going to just be easier and more useful to them.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we really try to do with our tutorials and new player experience.
And like I think someone in chat brought up the debuff icon on Hui, for example. You've been marked by Hui, you are in trouble.
Yeah.
I wonder how many people hover over that are new players.
I mean, it is a good example of a tooltip that is not helpful.
Agreed.
But it's a joke, and people appreciate our little jokes in the game. We don't do it as much. That's a very old joke that we've chosen to preserve. We could change that. But yeah, the amount of impact that would have on a new player experience is probably something in the magnitude of 0.001%.
Right. I think finding some of those interactions on your own are actually kind of cool, right? Like, I remember being a new player and somebody played Ares for the first time, and we got sucked into a Scylla ult, and then I immediately went, I want to play that god, or I want to play that other god, right? Or I want to play the one that did all the damage, or I'll never forget, I will never, ever, ever forget the time where we got our asses beat by a Shibalonki, and the screen was going black, and all of a sudden this dude was chunking all of our health, and these red numbers were popping up, and all of us were dead. The guy got like 5 pentakills in one match, and you know what the first thing I did the next match was? I picked Shibalonki, and I was like, I gotta learn this bastard, right? Like, so I think, you know, some of that is like you learn from those experience. Like there's like, you gotta like learn on the job a little bit. Like you can't information overload everyone. But there is a balancing act between like giving too much information and then also not enough, and not having it oversimplified. So that's interesting you guys said. Like I'd be curious if there was like the in-game tooltips were really general, and then like something like a SMITE library or catacombs or whatever, where you can look up like all the fine-tuned stuff outside of the game.
I feel like Dota is the only game that really puts it all in the game. Dota 2 does a pretty good job at that, but they still don't have every interaction. They just list a lot of common ones. Like when you click on like Pudge's hook pull, it'll say things, like this goes through walls, this can hit champions that are even affected by this type of immunity. It gives you a little bit of extra things. That's a pretty interesting system.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I have 2,200.
It's the only way to do it, right?
I have 2,200 hours in this game, and I found out yesterday that Hell's 1 and her light stance goes through the wall. So, I think, some things it's like, oh, man, that would have been great to know for the last, 400 games. But
how much Hell have you played, right? If you're playing a good bit of Hell, you probably would attempt after a game or two, right? And then you would know, and as you keep playing Hell, you wouldn't even think about it anymore.
That's also an excellent point. I have no rebuttal.
Yeah. Right. That's exactly the type of learning that we think is really important for new players, really to tie it all back in, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
That learning by experience and experimentation, and trying things and see what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and then just learning from that is the most rewarding experience in most cases.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I mean, that's good insight. I think a lot of people didn't get that new players get overwhelmed by a lot of that information, and I don't think I truly believed it until I just heard Ajax rattle off 100 different interactions at once inside of a single line ability. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine that being really overwhelming for somebody new. So it's interesting to see how you guys balance that, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving right along. Oh, this is my favorite question. I can't wait. This is the cool stuff for me. What's the creative process look like for designing a god? Right?
This is a tricky one.
Where do you guys start? Do you guys have a dartboard and it's got different, and I know you do. I've seen it.
Oh yeah, you've seen that.
I've seen it.
That dartboard's a joke.
But do you just say, we're doing this pantheon, we're gonna pick this guy? Is it driven by a lack of a certain role? How do you guys you wake up one morning and you're like, okay, this is the next thing we need to design because this is a cool kit we thought up. Where does it all start and how do you guys go from there?
All right, let me kick off this one, Pon, and then you can jump in with your most recent experience. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
So Pon just recently designed a god, so he'll have a very new and fresh perspective on this, on how things went.
Mm-hmm.
But so first of all, I have a blog post about this by the way on HiRezAjax.tumblr. Walk us through the process of god design. So I pulled this up just for my notes because this could be a pretty complicated question here. But so step one is
So I should have read that first before bothering you by asking me a question.
No, it's okay. I'm happy to give this answer. This answer could be a 2-hour talk on its own, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
But we'll try to give the short version. So first thing is actually choosing the character, right? And this is kind of goes along with that example I gave about the difficulties of being a game designer, where there's 100 million things you could do, but you have to pick one. Same thing with picking a new god. There's so many cool characters. Like we're using characters from mythology, so we do actually have a defined pool. Like games like Paladins actually creating their own. So like the choices are literally infinite, but they still have to find a way to pick what they're going to do next, right? So it's similar when we're talking about design features. Gods are work the same way. Generally, we know of a couple things we want. You know, we try to make sure we have diversity, number one. So we try to make sure, okay, you know, it's been a long time since we've done a hunter or something like that. Probably good to have a hunter upcoming in the schedule. Or it's been a long time since we've done a female character or a creature character. So we try to make sure we have a good rotation of, we don't try to follow any distinct patterns, but we want to make sure we're keeping everything, you know, giving every type of Smite player something new at a reasonable interval. Really, when it comes down to picking the god, though, it's a pretty complicated process. I mean, generally, I meet with the design team. So generally a small group of us, just like me, Pon, Clumsy, Tina, and we do some research and we come up with some characters and we pitch some things to each other. Really, we just like kind of pitch and brainstorm and kind of see what we can get excited about, which characters are the most interesting for either visually or with their gameplay potential. And then I take that to like the HiRez like leads, the Smite leads team, so like the lead of every different department, and I try to pitch all that to them. And a lot of the popular gods that or you know that community has asked for before have been brought up in those meetings multiple times. You know, we always go through a lot of choices there, but we have a lot of criteria to pick the gods. So we check it against what we've done recently, what else we want to do in the future, what are our limitations on design and art. Like, you know, certain characters that have 8,000 heads, just not a good choice for Smite. I'm sorry, like we can't do it. It's like certain things we have to make pretty heavy artistic choices to change those things about them,
which results in cultural backlash
feature, right? Or not necessarily cultural backlash, but if that's their only defining feature from mythology, that's just kind of a bummer, right? So yeah, we check all of these things against each other. We run through the pitch meeting, and then I come up with a schedule of upcoming gods that is about, you know, up to 6 to maybe 8 gods into the future.
Wow.
Although sometimes those can change in the future. Yeah. They can definitely change. We'll shift them around sometimes based on how things are going. But at least a rough plan.
So right now, you know the next 8 gods that are going to get released.
At least the next 4 or 5. I mean, because we did the planning a little while ago.
Yeah.
Session yet.
See, that's pretty cool to me, right? Because I've been in other games where, you know, you create like, I don't know, classes or characters, and they're, you know, they're rammed so close together that you have like these really short development cycles where it's like as soon as one's done, you go back into the next one and you just kind of pump crap out. And it, you know, the fact that there's a longer lead time than even we see is really interesting. I guess that means that you get more time with the kit and character.
Well, even when we were doing gods a little quicker last year, we still plan out pretty far in advance. And I mean, the planning is there to help us keep track of the whole diversity thing, right? That's really all we're trying to keep track of. We're making sure we don't do the same thing too many times. And the plan can change all the time in the future. Yeah. There's times where we've taken god only 1 or 2 gods out and switched its place or changed the god entirely.
Right.
That happens, but it's really just to help us make sure we have a good template and make sure we're getting that diversity. So I just talked for like way too long about even picking the god. I didn't even get into actually starting on the design. So I can let Pon talk about that, but I'll give him my quick bullet points. Yeah. So once we pick the god, first we brainstorm with the rest of the team, other teams. Then we give specific design feedback on art, theme, and tone. Then the designers actually do the abilities, or at least a rough draft of the abilities. We manage all of the ability development. So like when we're designing a god, the designer is in charge of making sure the programmers and the artists know exactly what to do to make that ability work. So we send them the tasks, we document things, then we play test and iterate it, and then we polish and balance. So that's that's just the quick summary. But if Pon, you want to expand on some of your experiences going through that little roller coaster I just described.
Yeah. So we get a god, we go, okay, this is what we're working on now. So in my case, it was Achilles. And so we got immediately all the core designers together. So AJ, Tina, Clumsy, in a meeting talking about what could Achilles do. And we got like a good list down. And so we just kind of like, okay, these are the kind of themes we're thinking of. After that, we send out invites to a whole bunch of different teams, esports bros, artists, programmers, animators, just basically every department be like, what do you think this character would do? And we just kind of get a huge brainstorm list. After that, it's designer's responsibility to narrow down those into like a few kits. And then once they're narrowed down, they're represented to the design team core. That's further refined until it's like the kit that then gets one final brainstorm pass. And then once that's good, there's a sync meeting with all the art leads and all the people who are going to be working on it. That kit is then okayed or vetoed, depending on how the room is. Basically, once it gets to this point, though, there's been so much constant back and forth with everyone that it's almost certainly like if you're getting in that meeting room, it's probably mostly good to go. And then once that gets the okay, programmers design start working on the base implementation of it. As you're implementing it, you're trying to discuss it with all the teams, make sure the theme feels good. If something feels off, how to resolve it. Achilles 2 was the big one for me, where Achilles 2, like, it was this like spotlight ability that was supposed to feel really cool and like you're taking the center stage, and it took a while to get the kind of heal component of that and how to make sure that felt like I'm taking a spotlight and getting rewarded for doing cool things to make that come across. And so that was a lot of discussion with the programmer I was working with, as well as the FX team. And of course, the entire time this is happening, all the other designers, artists have their input too. So it's not like one person's doing it. It's still a team effort. There's just one central point of contact. And then once you get like, you work through any issues that you have like syncs every so often where you're like, okay, here's the current state. Everyone looks at it and says, okay, here's what we're going to be working on in the next week or two. You guys work on it for a week or two. You have another sync, keep working on it. And then eventually it goes out to the world, and then they get to play it and see how it is.
Is there a big celebration in the office when you guys complete a god? Everybody
yeah,
dances?
I brought in cookies from a cookie shop by HiRez, and I also brought the programmer because Achilles, while he might seem somewhat simple, the 3 is the shooter device that you have to swap in and out, and managing the states of it was a big headache. So the programmer who did all that stuff, I brought him an ice cream cookie sandwich. So
I mean,
we got.
You're quite a guy. How do I work with you?
I went above and beyond on that. I felt bad. Like I was like, oh shit, I should have.
Well, like it was like
oh, this is a family episode. Wow, Ajax.
Oh, sorry.
I'm joking. That was a total. I was joking.
That's only the first one. I've been pretty good about it. I usually curse a lot more.
But
there's just so many awesome things about the god design process, really. And you know, I was more in Pon's position on the gods not that long ago. And I really loved it. And now taking a more leadership position, I'm definitely doing different things about the god process, but it's still really fun. And I mean, Pon and Clumsy are, and you know, Tina, and also our level designer Matt and stuff like that. People you don't see. We have some pretty amazing people that even the community doesn't see that often, and we have such a great team. I have to say, like, probably the most exciting parts about the god design process, though, those initial pitch meetings to kind of decide the god's pretty crazy. The first time that the god designer will come to me and we'll have a meeting where essentially they pitch me all the kits they've tried. So they'll come. I generally, after the brainstorming, we'll have the god designer will come up with like 3 to 4 complete kits, like just on paper, just really roughed out. That's always a super fun meeting where the other designers are in there, and then generally by the end of it, I'm just like, I like the passive of kit 2 with half of kit 3's, and then the ultimate on kit 1, but add this, take the CC, like, and move it here, and we kind of like,
it's like Frankensteining kits together. Right? That's awesome, man. That's cool.
Yeah, it's more like we get a lot of good abilities, and sometimes when we're in that early brainstorm process, like one thing that I always fall, I always make the same mistake in my kits is like I kind of come up with a theme for the kit and then I way overdo it. Like my initial pitch for Tara's kit, like she was summoning a deployable wall in every single ability.
her basic attacks.
Her basic attacks summoned walls too. And I was just like, walls. She's the god. She's the earth goddess. She's gonna summon things and break things. So she's got to make all of these things everywhere. And like that sounded like a really cool idea, but when I went to pitch it to HiRez Scott, and Gandhi and some of the other fish, the other designers who work on Smite, they were like, dude, like, what are you thinking? Like, that's way too many walls. Like, I know it makes sense from like a designer perspective to really like focus on that, but generally you really only need, you need the key hook. Doesn't need to be in literally every part of the kit.
Right.
So then we like, well, but you have this ability on kit 3 that I don't really like any of the kit, but like the second ability on that is really awesome. Like, just make that work and make that fit the theme of kit 1, and that'll be amazing. And that's the kind of stuff that we need. We rely on each other to help you see that, because when you're just looking at it by yourself, you can miss things like that, or you can overdo it.
Yeah, combat dodge on Achilles was part of a kit where the rest of it got scrapped, and I remember thinking, well, combat dodge enabled so much of the other kit. How does this ability stand on its own now? But the ability just actually works with the rest of the kit. You can the one you can like dash in and then cancel it and then stun them and then hit them. Like, the ability works with other parts, but when you get so focused, it's hard to like. But this was supposed to do all this other stuff with all these other abilities.
Right.
And you still have to tweak it to make sure it's not like just pure Frankenstein. The initial combat dodge was infinite reset, which didn't happen.
We all know how that would go.
So you tweak things to make it work within the kits that like everyone kind of like, oh yeah, this ability is really cool. And sometimes even after those meetings, you come up with whole different abilities still. Where it's like, okay, well, these 3 abilities work, but we still need a 4th. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely not just like interchanging completely disconnected abilities. A lot of times we're like, kind of like the core of that ability, but if you just make it slow, then it'll synergize really well with this kit. And so we're making tweaks like that. That's probably one of the most critical processes of the God design. Then I think one of the most fun process part of it, the God design, is when the God designer first starts working with the gameplay programmer. As Pon said, he bought his gameplay programmer extra treat. That's a very, very good call, because they're generally the guys that hate us the most during God development. They make everything work. Every time we change our minds, it's them putting in extra hours at the office. Like the gameplay programmer I worked with, who's now, he's been promoted throughout the company too. Me and him got along super well from the very beginning, and we definitely had to have some very tough conversations and stuff like, dude, I'm so sorry, but like, this Camazot's alt is not going to work. I need you to remake it, and things like that. And if you don't get along well with your coworkers and like treat them with respect and understand and apologize when you make mistakes, like, you just don't get things done.
Dude, Achilles passive. The Achilles passive had different interactions early on, and it also has a whole bunch of states you have to manage. And so the programmer got it working, and then there was just like this break case that he couldn't fix. And so we went through a whole bunch of iterations, and then we changed the design on it. So even all that work he did on that, he had to just scrap.
Oh god.
And like that always feels really bad, because like you have to be like, is it really worth him doing all this? Is there another design solution you can come up with so that he doesn't have to do that? And that's still better for the kit. And sometimes there's just no, to make the kit work, this has to change.
And we do the same thing to the artists sometimes too, but so we really try not to, but it's part of the process, because as I've said in many other blogs, the plate testing.
Oh, no, he's back.
He's kind of back.
Yep.
Did I lose my audio?
A little bit.
You're good. You're good now.
You're good now.
I'm all hardwired in on my wireless.
Oh.
Oh no.
Oh
Disaster.
god. He's gone.
It's over.
Keep trying, Ajax.
Testing. Sorry.
Testing. Hello.
Maybe
it cuts out for like a second, and then you're back.
Yeah.
Am I okay now?
You're good now.
I think you're okay now.
It
Maybe
wouldn't be the Plat
fiance just,
perspective without technical issues. Like, I feel
she
like
might have just like booted up the HBO Go in the other room or something. It's on high def.
Somebody clip that and make a meme out of that face, please.
That face is good.
I made my oh no face.
I'm already gonna meme you off the one where you were drinking water earlier.
Oh, was it? Did I look too much like what was it?
It was full profile, extended neck. Like, let me set this. Oh yeah, it's going on Reddit. Don't worry, I got you, buddy.
It's all good. All I was saying is, that happens with the designers and our interaction with. It's really important. Am I cutting out again?
Somebody
You cut
doesn't
out.
want you to say
Like,
whatever you're
no,
trying to say.
There's like a part of that sentence that you've tried to say like 2 or 3 times now, and every time you get to that sentence, part of the sentence, it cuts.
I feel like he's doing that just to mess with us. Be like, all right, by the way you guys unlock all the limited skins in game is, and then you know, but
All right.
no,
Tell me if it persists.
oh, we're good.
Okay, I'm really sorry.
No, I was gonna
Just
say,
go for your sentence.
I've had this issue in Discord before. Lately, my friends in our just casual channel. It's just cutting out still.
it's fine
No,
now.
it's fine. It's not enough that you can't figure out what you're saying.
Yeah,
And
you're
it's
good.
like only once per sentence, and it's very small.
I'm very sorry.
I'll hire somebody to transcript this.
One last thing about this is just the importance of playtesting. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So even though we have that big kit meeting where the designer has made tons of kits and we work together to synergize and make the best ones and pick our favorites and what'll work the best, still once we actually play it, we make a lot more changes. And that's a really important part of the process, but it's also can be very taxing on certain teams. So we have to be careful how big our changes are. And I've redesigned abilities from gods I've worked on at the last minute. And it's not fun, but it's I would say most of the time it's paid off really well, because you have to understand when you've designed a bad ability, you have to understand that and just fix it.
Yeah, I mean that takes a lot of like shedding your pride, right? I think that's a big part of it, right? And we've all created things, we've all had projects, and it's your baby, and you take it somewhere else, and somebody says, this isn't good work, right? Whether it was in school or work or otherwise, and it takes a lot of personal practice to look at what you've created and say, you know what, you're right, and I gotta make an adjustment. So that's certainly important. I think it's I don't know. You guys should post whenever you guys release a new god about like how taxing it was on the rest of the team. We'll crowdfund a present for the game designers and the artists and whatnot.
I redesigned Discordia alt with like a week left to do it.
Oh yeah.
But I'm very, very happy with the new ultimate. But the old one was very interesting, but just didn't work. And we tried so hard to make it work. Let's try this to make it work. Let's add more visual cues to make it work, and it just wasn't working. But I'm very happy with what we came up with. But man, it was scary to make that decision that late in the process.
And they'll never tell you what they used to be, because they may use them again later.
I guess so. I doubt we'd ever use this again later. I think data mining got a bit of it too, so I wouldn't be afraid to talk about it, but maybe another time. But for the general points also on just god design outside of just check out my blog post for anything we missed upon. So the importance of iterating and playing and making changes during the playtest is really important. Another thing is just how important the actual like theme and tone is. The designer really owns that, like making sure this god's like attitude and personality and lore and abilities and then their kit playstyle like all match up. Because even if you make a really like mechanically great kit, if those other things don't work out, like people won't like it. Right. I think most players don't understand how important like animation and other types of cues that convey how the character like is as a person or as a giant bat or whatever it is, right? Like those things working well and feeling natural, like it's all makes sense for the character, are super important. And people will not know why they don't like it, but they'll just be like, I just don't like this character. Like they'll just say like it feels bad.
Do you guys play like wireframe versions of the character where it's just a stick figure with like cones on it? And
yes, kind of. I mean, in the early process, we play with copied models from other gods.
Yeah.
Okay,
Achilles
so it's like
Achilles was actually the colon skin before the colon actually had colon skin had textures. So it was like a rainbow version of the like the dark colon skin that came out recently. We've also had like I think Sylvanas was like golden Geb.
Yeah, we picked just like
Fafnir or Fenrir.
Yeah, Camazotz was Fenrir. So we use those and then we work off that until we get the final models. And
that sounds terrifying, just a flying wolf just crushing through the sky after you.
Yeah, I'm still so sad we lost the footage of Flappy Fenrir. Because he used to fly and he would actually flap his arms like this during the Camazotz testing. And he would fly above you and swoop down, but as Fenrir. But with like animations that the animators did in like 2 seconds. So it's just like this.
Oh my god.
It's enough, so we get temp stuff, right, Pon?
Yeah, in the early stages, you just be like, hey, I need temp things for XYZ so that it feels good when we try and playtest it.
Sure.
Like as much as you could make an ability feel really good, if it doesn't have animation or sound or there are things to convey that what's happening, everyone's gonna be like, this feels awful.
Right.
Sound and animation and making sure that things are conveyed well are important, which it's hard to do when you don't have assets made for that. So getting super rough temps in helps a ton.
But that starts early, like in the concepting phase. So like I have a lot of, just as lead designer, I have a lot of on just our characters, visuals and how they look, and skins and stuff like that too. The artists make the right calls for like the smaller details. They're like, oh no, like this part of the chest plate is going to blur into this, and they're really important for that. But I'm there to give the more general tone and the more general feel. I'm like this character is more like Discordia. She's kind of like fun and crazy and wants to cause chaos, like she'd want to get everybody arguing with each other at a party. She's not like, I just want to murder the entire world, giant evil. And there's a very distinct difference in that, and it's important that the designers convey those types of things to the artists, even in the early stages. And then as we go through with the ability animations and the color schemes on the effects and things like that, where we try to give that type of feedback. And most of the time the artists are obviously fantastic at learning that and helping us focus it even more and just playing off it. And it's a lot more of a, like, there's not so much giving orders. It's all like, oh, I think this character would be really cool if it did that, and the animator's like, oh well, and then they get all excited and they pitch you this animation and everybody's happy and we leave the meeting room. Like, that's the ideal scenario, and that happens a good bit of the time actually.
Yeah, and sometimes they just add things that are like, yeah, that totally fits the description. Like the Achilles shield throw into the air as he's backing, and he does like a pose where he like flips his hair. Like totally fit with the theme and personality we were going for.
Oh, the slow-mo hair flip?
Yeah, and that,
I
never
that.
said, man, it'd be cool if he threw a shield up in the air and had a slow-mo hair flip and he caught a shield as he backed, right? Like, that was just something that they did.
Yeah,
which is also
they did
why
a great job with that one.
There are a lot of people like, and this is why we hammer it home multiple times, where it's like, people are like, oh man, this was a pawn god. It's like, no, there's so many people working on a character. Someone like sent me a message being like, you made his visuals amazing. I'm like, thanks. didn't do that pretty much at all.
Right.
So.
Like, we had some very specific discussions with animation to make sure like the ultimate read clearly for what was the hittable area and stuff like that. But a lot of times, each team has their own impact on the god, and it's a huge team effort. The fact that we have one designer kind of manage the project is really from an organizational standpoint. Like, yeah,
you're just a project manager and an overall kind of vision leader. It's not like, I mean, it takes a village, right? I think a lot of people don't get that, like, from just like a basic understanding of game design, right? Is like, it's not one person who's doing the animation, the bug fixes. You don't get everything approved by the same person. It's just kind of there, right? And so it's that's good information.
Yeah, man, there are game designers that don't even understand that, or it takes them a couple projects before they learn that, and how important it is to be humble and listen to people's criticism. And make changes when needed. And it's difficult. I've definitely struggled with that over the years. I think I've gotten way better at it after having some practice, but it doesn't come naturally to everybody. So it's just it's a really interesting dynamic, the whole game development process.
So I guess we can obviously we knew this one was going to take up the good lion's share of time, right? I think we got like one or two more questions, so let's chug through that. But Pon, just one quick last question. Obviously, Achilles was your last god. I think I need to ask what's on everybody's mind when you stamp the box to let Achilles go to release.
What?
Oh yeah,
no. Who hurt you?
Look, man. I just wanted him to punch people with his shield really hard, and he punched people with his shield really hard. And when you're punched that hard, you're stunned for a while. It happened.
Oh, God, no.
It was thematic.
It was a joke. I'm just busting your stones, man. I really enjoyed Achilles. I thought he was a great god. I think I sent both you guys a message and said, his kit feels intuitive, it's fluid, and it's a lot of fun. And so,
oh yeah, I do remember that now. It's a funny way you phrase that, just because like at that point in the process, we've been working on the god for so long, and we've made it stronger and weaker and stronger and weaker. Like, it's not really just like
initially.
Yeah, there was so many playtests internally where like, yeah, this god does nothing. What's the feedback Pon got in the early stages? So by the time it's like ready to go out, that's like, we don't even think about it in that way. Like, it's not like, okay, stamp, it's ready to go. It's been like, we've just been stacking building blocks for so long.
Yeah. That's great.
It's just a different personality style, I guess. the perception between the community versus us is like we're so used to it by then.
Yeah, right.
But then of course we release it and we learn all these new things and we get all the stats and then we get to, and that was really my final point about god design, is that the shipping of the god is by no means the end, right?
Right.
We have so much maintenance to do after that. Like, you know, just fixing Dodgy's hit chain, stuff like that. Me and Pon got a little too creative on that one. We found out it was, people didn't like it. We tried. I tried giving animation some pretty complicated like direction there, and it just didn't work out. So we had to fix it, even if that wasn't necessarily a huge balance issue for the character. It just felt bad, right? So, and then of course, just game balance in general is a huge part of our job. So we don't expect characters to be perfect on release. So that's just the beginning, getting it all done, just the beginning, and then you have to go out there and let people try it and break it and criticize you for it or praise you for it, and then make even more.
So
tweaks.
here's my last question. And I think there was, and this, I swear this is the last one on this topic, and we can move on because I know I've already taken up a ton of your time. Is at what point do you look at the data and you have the changes already made? Like, at what point do you say, okay, we're not gonna make the community suffer through another week of this busted god, and we're gonna tone the damage down right now and hot fix it and ship a quick hot fix? Like, I understand that's way more complicated than I'm making it out to be, but like,
generally we don't do balance hotfix. Like, we wait for the next patch.
It's been a long time since we've ever had to do, like, there were a few cases on release where like characters were really, 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 really overtuned. But it's been a long time since someone was so overtuned that it was like, this is an emergency.
Yeah, me and Pon were both there for release Guan, so you don't need to tell us. We were playing the game a lot at that point.
Yeah, I know. Like, I loved playing Achilles, but it was like after the first week, I was like, oh man, like there's one in every match, and if you don't have one, like, you're toast. And I was like, actually, thank you, because I played a whole lot more ranked that week to get away from them. But
well, there's two things about that really. One is the perception does not always match the reality.
Right.
Ideally, it does, because that makes our jobs way easier. But we've had many gods where players are telling us it's overpowered nonstop, and there is quite the opposite statistics. Generally, this happens in more complicated gods or higher skill cap gods. Players will tell us that they're overpowered, and then we'll just see that a large majority of the population is actually not being successful with the god.
And by large majority, it can be like, if you look at only masters ranked, it could still be unsuccessful. Like, I think some people couple SPL level caliber and teamwork and assume high level ranked and high level play is the same when they're very wildly different things. So
this is when we could get into this for a long time for balance strategy.
Yeah,
but as far as new gods and being, the first thing we do is we have to confirm, does the perception match the reality? If it doesn't, we have a whole lot of strategies and ways to do that. If it does, it's really easy, right? Achilles, a lot of people told us he was strong. We checked the stats, turned out he was pretty strong. We knew a couple numbers that already looked big just from our experience. We toned him down. If there are, if we get in those tougher scenarios, then we get into the kit. We start looking at more details about what needs to be balanced. Specifically, is there a certain frustration point? Is there one ability that just really annoys players? I hate using that word, but something that people are complaining about consistently.
Discordia Strife.
Something that players are complaining about consistently that we can adjust to make players feel better. And we kind of have a good idea from experience from previous data, like what type of changes will actually affect the god's stats a lot, and what types the players will assume they'll affect the stats a lot, and those don't necessarily match up either. So in those cases where like the god is actually not performing very well but people think it's very strong, we'll try to target those frustration points, or we'll try to target things that we know we can take down and will only affect or we try to only affect high level players with this change. So general players will be okay, or we know like this change feels really big but it won't hurt the character too bad.
Yeah, like the recent Thoth changes, right? Everybody thought he was dead, and he's still a strong character, right? So
they sure did say that at first, didn't they? Huh?
Yeah.
Thoth is a tricky one, though. We could talk another hour about him if we wanted to.
Okay.
There's a lot of strategies there, so.
Well, I obviously don't want to take up your entire night, right? And again, appreciate you guys being here. So let's just chug through these last ones. I think we got one or two, and then just some viewer questions. And like, how do I stay informed? Like, how do I stay up to date? Is it reading your Tumblr? Do I got to watch patch notes? It seems like there's just so much information, and again, to drag this down back to the level of like a new player, right? Like, if I'm just coming to Smite, like, what are the best things to keep an eye on, right?
Right.
Follow Smite Game on Twitter. Smite Game is generally a pretty good just source of like Smite Game Twitter has a large reach. It's used to make sure that important beats are conveyed to everyone out there. And so if it's something that you should be paying attention to, Smite Game is going to post it. Smite Game is going to retweet it, right? So like if there is like one place you went, it'd be Smite Game Twitter, because that's just the central place for things.
Definitely do that. If you're a new player and you're mostly just concerned about, actual gameplay, the best way to stay informed is really seek out more information for your god or your role or whatever is specific to you. Look for that. You can find guides. You can find them on YouTube. You can find them. You can watch certain streamers that play your role, things like that. That type of thing is really that's the advanced tutorial of Smite. That's how you're going to get a lot better outside of just practicing and figuring things out on your own. Some people are good enough to do that, but not everybody. But I think following the Twitter is definitely the most important thing. We do a lot of our announcements of just, balance, fixes, fun stuff, sales stuff, all that stuff comes through the Twitter. So if you're brand new to the game, like, you should definitely check that out. And then just find the best actual gameplay resource for you outside of that.
And also, if you follow that Twitter, you often see like if like we're posting an announcement, like, so let's say like I post an announcement, it might get retweeted there. Just seeing like who Smite Game is retweeting. There's a whole bunch of platform guys that update server status. There's a whole bunch of designers who talk about the game. There's artists who do concept art, and so you'll kind of naturally find those people because they're posting consistently, and they'll get traction there. So it's hard because there's a lot of people that are really cool to follow, but depending on your interest, like if you don't care about fan art, then you wouldn't want to follow one of the artists. But if you really cared about fan art, then you'd want to follow them. And so that's why I say Smite Game is the best source, because it provides an avenue for you to find those people.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. What do you guys think about the Smite Reddit?
It's fun.
I mean, would you consider that a good resource for people, or?
Sometimes.
I think it's a good resource as a whole. We talked a little bit earlier about like the idea of kind of like vocal minority, and I think the Smite Reddit does a really good job at policing itself, at least more than other communities. So I wouldn't say anyone shouldn't go there. It's definitely a very valuable resource. Just don't always take everything as super crazy fact, and that's just a good lesson. Like if someone tells you this character's bad, try a few games of it for yourself and see how you feel about it. Because
be on the lookout for fake news.
I've just seen people dissuaded from doing something that they thought would be really, really fun because someone told them that was a bad idea. It's like you can, especially if you're not playing in the SPL games, you can probably do fun stuff and be successful. So that's my only warning on it. But as a whole, I like the Smite Reddit a lot.
I mean, we check it every day. We check it every day. We're very active. It's a very important part of any gaming community. So
yeah,
Reddit is great. I mean, it's just not necessarily the best place for your new player guides to gods and stuff like that. You probably find that elsewhere. People on Reddit are generally a little more advanced, or they're talking about different types of meta issues.
Sure. So it's not great for beginner play. Good as you start to get into the game a little bit more.
Yeah, it's fun though. Like I said earlier, like whenever I pick up a new game, you can bet that I'm checking their subreddit just because it's fun. And when you're really engaged in something, and like even when you can't play it, you want to go learn more about it or see what people are talking about, that is the best place to do it, right? Like, so, I mean, I just started playing Pokemon again or something like that, and I've been checking that. I didn't check Pokemon for like a year since Sun and Moon came out, but then I had a friend who picked it up and hadn't played in a long time, and now I'm like way back into it, and it's like now super fun to check every day again. It's just it's great. And
I know we all just started
the same way, right?
We all just started playing Final Fantasy 14, and I've been in the subreddit every single day.
Yeah, it's great.
So, all right, the last and obviously the craziest section. If this turns into a shit show, I'm just gonna cut it off. Guys, we're gonna do viewer Q&A.
Okay.
All of you are trolls.
It's cool, man. I've seen plenty of questions we can answer in here.
Yeah, so if you guys have serious questions you guys want to answer that are, again, keep the focus of the show in mind. Right? This is generally meant to be viewed by new players who are looking for low to mid-level resources on how to get better playing the game. So if you have questions that are around that, please ask them now. If we don't see any of those, we can move into some of the higher level stuff and the more targeted design questions. Yeah, and if you're trolling, we're just going to ignore you.
Okay. You gonna pick them, or how are we gonna do it?
It's up to you guys. We can
Yeah,
All right,
if you
this is
can
a good
already
one.
we can already answer.
Yeah. If you guys see one, just go ahead and answer. I mean, these could be quick
Yeah.
questions.
We'll try to go fast.
This is the first time we've ever had like heavy viewer participation, so I'm like getting a little overwhelmed.
All right. Have you guys ever thought about a god mechanic that disables sound? Pon, is that the one you were looking at?
No, that wasn't the one I was looking at. I was looking at a different one, but that one's fun.
Because we've talked about this one a lot of times. I mean, we
Yeah.
pitched this kind of idea a lot.
Like Camazot's with the screech, right? Like,
Well,
Yeah,
we,
but I
we
really
even talked
wanted
about
to
like
do-
silences as a whole. Like the idea was semi-pitched, not like semi-seriously, of like silences actually silencing your in-game sound. Partially
or,
because they're
preventing you from using VGS.
yeah, because like partially it comes down to like some silences don't necessarily have that like immediate feel that you're affected by something, and it's not until you try and do something else that you're affected. But if like your sound suddenly died, you'd know, okay, I'm silenced right now, right? Like, so
auditory feedback.
like we've definitely tossed around a ton of ideas before around like how could you manipulate sound to do very cool things.
Tricky thing with abilities like this, as I just want to mention, is that these kind of like soft skills, they're very hard to justify a whole ability slot. Like if you can already see like gods that don't have another damaging ability, like how Scylla can only hit the whole wave with like one damaging ability, that can really hurt her ability to perform. So it's like when you have abilities that do things like that, it generally has to be like a secondary effect. You have to have other things that are happening. You still want to have like skill shot and damage. So you can't just like make an ability that's like just makes your opponent not hear things, because for the most part, that's just going to be useless. But we've talked about this type of like mind trickery stuff on gods many times, and we start like crazy up in the sky, and we generally tone this down to find the most important part about it. So like I think originally like Morrigan could do a lot of these things, but then we distilled that down to make it clear like she really just needed an evasion and some confusion. So that's where the clone stealth ability came from. And instead of needing to like make players' screens get messed up or their sounds get messed up, which had more potential frustration or difficulty in general, this ability worked really well for me.
Also, I'm seeing some questions that are like specifically X balance suggestion or balance talk. It's gonna be hard to answer those because I can't.
Yeah,
give
not the point of the
definitive
show.
answers. Right, like someone asked the Vimana question, which is, yeah, Vimana gets punished by upgrade curse. There might be some room for changes there, but it's hard for me to say something because that would be taken as fact, and so I don't necessarily want to go into like super detailed balance.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we can answer some of those. Is
Yeah.
AMC's Hive nerf being monitored? This is an interesting question. AMC, cool god, right? He was super not meta for like a really long time, and people would cheer when he finally got picked. And then a couple balance changes to him directly and a couple meta changes made him really strong. So for most of season 4, he became like top pick, top ban hunter. And then we did nerf him at the beginning of season 5. That nerf was pretty effective. He is no longer top pick, top ban hunter. He's still performing at a reasonable level, though. He's not dead by any means. So we're keeping an idea on him. I wouldn't say the question was, is it permanent? I would never say that about a balance change, really. But AMC was nerfed. The nerfs were pretty successful as far as not killing the character, but definitely bringing it down to make other hunters have their advantages shown. So
I have a question
change, I think.
around that. We talk about AMC in particular. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on a lot of the feedback around the ADC role this season? Right, I think.
Yeah,
is that
we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
Shout outs to the pro player Discord, because it's been super active. Those guys are really helpful. This is the best communication we've ever had between pros and the design team. It definitely has some pros and cons to this system, but everybody seems to really be enjoying it, including ourselves. We spend a lot of time there, even during our workday. So shout outs to that. But we have been talking a lot about hunters and duo lane, and I think most people's opinion is that hunters are really not very far off from the balance point. Like, one thing that exacerbates that is they've been so dominant for a really long time. So now that they're slightly undertuned, they feel a lot worse than they actually are. And we just made a couple small tweaks to their kind of power curve through some items. We feel pretty confident about those. But this was an expected result of the splitting nerf, which is really the most important thing. And we talked about this, Pon, for a long time, even before early season 4.
Yeah.
lots of complaints. People like, okay, the whole game is split up and split everything. It's so strong to just do that. If you're not doing that, you're playing wrong. And that's really what we didn't want. Like, we don't want something where it's like, this is the only way to do things. So when everyone was splitting, we knew the splitting nerf would have to happen in Season 5, and we thought that would be, or we were pretty confident that would be a really strong feature and a really popular feature of the new Conquest. And I think generally we were right. Like, people really, really enjoy it. But a known issue was the duo lane experience. And we experimented with a lot of things, like adding experience to certain items. We tried all that stuff in development. Some of it worked, but a lot of it had potential for exploit, to the point where you'd end up with 5 of the XP items on the bill on the team. Some couple of the things just they didn't feel like Smite. A couple of the other changes we did, which made things tricky. But the number one thing is just, I think the change is really good. I think it's made the meta a lot more flexible. It's let people really choose their team comp and build around it and play around it. And I think one thing that we haven't seen yet, even from pros, is something like lane swapping certain classes to power spike them. So if for example, players right now like mids and jungles are getting really strong, and that works. But if we do some meta shifts and some item shifts, like players might put warriors and hunters in different places to get them higher level, because like mages play better from behind now, or things like that. And the splitting reduction has let us really opened up the flexibility for that, and we're really excited for the long-term health of Smite, where those options are there.
Yeah, I always thought that was like an interesting point, right? Where like if your mid is like way ahead, maybe they can go to a place where, on the one hand, it's like, yeah, you want them where they're going to have the most impact on the map, but on the other, it's like, they could go somewhere where they're not getting as much farm, and somebody else can come in and take over the mid lane, and grab a couple of camps and try and catch back up or something like that. I don't know. I get where you're going, and that's a really cool way to think about it. And it also kind of goes back to like the vocal minority thing, right? Where it's like you got a bunch of people who spent 2 seasons shredding the hell out of everyone because they got a little bit ahead and the itemization was great and they just blew everyone apart, and then all of a sudden you don't feel like you're as impactful. And it's frustrating across the board, but the reality of it is that it's like maybe it's just a case of people not really figuring out the most optimal way to overcome those challenges. They're just bitching about the fact that it's not what they're used to.
I mean, I wouldn't even say that, right? It's just that there is so many potential options. Maybe they're not better, we don't really know yet. That's one of the beauties of working on a complicated game, and one with a lot of player expression, where they can choose their own strategies. Maybe they aren't good, but they're there at least, and we can try them. We have a lot of ways to flex that.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that like even if like we were to sit back and not do much, things could really, really heavily shift. We saw that last season with Eager, I believe, where they came out with a strategy that people hadn't been running before, and it became the meta-defining thing, where the meta had been pretty stagnant with a few swaps here and there for probably 5 or 6 months.
Talking about Chang'e Jungle?
No.
End of Season 3, they did do that, though. End of Season 3, that's when we saw the level 1, and that was like, that strategy was there all along.
Yeah.
Just people didn't do it, and then they did, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is really good, and now everybody is doing it.
For a lot of new meta things, they were all viable. It's just someone decided to actually put into action and do the work to make sure that it worked well. And so seeing those type of shifts were really cool. And Season 5, considering how different it is from any other season, like Season 4 and Season 3, you had a good foundation to work off of the previous seasons. For Season 5, splitting change really changed a lot. I don't think we've really fully scratched the surface of what potential ideas there are that people could be running. Not to say that hunters don't need some help if they're a little bit underperforming, but there is room to experiment still, and we could just say, okay, we're going to make this change and make sure that this is working, but that might stifle different creative options that pro players have.
Yeah, that's a great question, though.
So let's buzz through a few of these. No, there will never be 5-man ranked.
Hey, we have some creative ideas maybe in the long term to see.
I heard you guys are making matchmaking changes. You're not allowed to talk about, but
we can talk about that a little bit. You just need to read the post that me and Pon spent a lot of time very specifically. So read the post. Like we said in the post, this is the experimentation stage. We're starting with it tomorrow. There'll be a post about it tomorrow. So it's really exciting, I think, but we just need to make sure that we understand that this is a work in progress still.
Yeah,
it's work in progress.
I think
questions.
Yeah, this is a great question. I was actually just highlighting that the has Arachne's third web actually had any effect on her statistical success rate, or have you found that to be a non-factor beyond the first 2 to 3 camps cleared in the first minute of the game?
This is a PonPon question, so I'll just kick back.
So I risk being memed like AJ, but Arachne has never been like that statistically bad. I believe there's a whole Tumblr article explaining her situation, but she's never been bad in casuals. If you play in casuals, you're going to do fine.
Oh, she ruffle stomps people who are new to the game too. Like, I mean, it's like disgusting.
And by casual, I mean like even masters ranked she does pretty well. It sometimes fluctuates based on patch, but she generally holds her own. It was really a super high competitive end that she was really struggling. And the change to the web, while you can use it and have some impact in the early game for casuals, it didn't boost her like crazy to where she's now in an unmanageable state. But pro players can totally use that third web setup to do clever things. And that feels like a change that this character is fundamentally decently strong and everywhere else. And this change really helped competitive players actually pick her up and use her well. That's like kind of a change where it's like pro levels can use this extra web to do really cool things. Casual players where this character's already strong, they won't necessarily min-max that so hard, so it doesn't cause her to go wild in the stat.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, she's a disruptor now, right? Like, everybody kind of has their like flow through the jungle. You either do one or two things when you start in the jungle. It's like speed, backs, blue, and then left harpies, or it's like speed, red, purple, gank, you know, what have you, right? And like with Arachne on the board, like there's just a giant question mark of, holy crap, where did she put these webs? And like, how is this going to ruin my rotation? Where am I going to lose farm?
And breaking them is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Really
yeah, well, look what happened to PBM, right? Like, I mean, that was a crazy level 1. So I like the fact that it's added this like level of uncertainty at the beginning of matches that makes you have to like think on the fly as opposed to just like going through the motions.
Best thing about it too is it's very unique to her, right? We wanted to, like, especially when we're talking about Arachne balance and just god balance in general, there's plenty of things people suggested. Redesign her, just give her something more traditional, but that is then you lose Arachne, right? And we gave you a different assassin, and that's not cool. And as Arachne was redesigned once, because some of her old playstyle things were just, you know, rough, but we can talk about that in another way. But we were really excited to find a way that buffed her statistically, but also helped highlight her unique feature, which is this like remote jungle clear, which is like really cool and really unique, and takes a certain amount of experimentation to find out the perfect way to do it, but it's like, it's really cool.
Dude, it's Season 0 Smite where you used to be able to lay eggs at every camp, and then when they died, the buffs just warped to you, and so you could be level 3 Arachne as the first mini wave met with every buff in the game on you.
Oh wow!
It's like a slight homage to that, where you can like remote kill a camp. Like as a super, like, because like I said, Arachne was the first character I ever played. It's like my favorite change to like probably any character we've done.
And like we're trying to keep her playstyle. Yeah, that's great. But certain playstyles like insta pulling an enemy from far away and then watching them die to a bunch of pets is just like I'm sorry. Like, it's fun for you, but counterplay we have to keep in track of and things like that. So I think I'm really happy with Arachne right now.
So let's quick fire some of these other questions. Thanks for that. Sorry. I mean, I love Arachne. I think she's grossly underplayed.
We're bad at quick questions. We talk too much.
No, I know. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. If you guys want to keep chatting, by all means.
I mean, how long does your show usually go?
Between an hour and a half and an hour and 45 minutes. So usually around there. So
we're not even 2 hours yet then.
No. Yeah. Thoughts on mana drain items or abilities on gods?
Oh yeah, me and Pon just worked on this. Like, there was a big post of people talking about this kind of mechanic, and we tried to design the best mana drain we could. And we were looking at the feedback and the way people thought they would want to use it, and it sounded like, I mean, I'm trying to think of the most eloquent way to put this, but the mana drain didn't really do anything that you can't already do in a better, more fun way, I guess, like that. So what does the mana drain do? 2 things it can do so always good design principles is boil it down. Like, what is the key purpose of this item or this ability? Mana drain can do 2 things, right? It can prevent people from doing something. So you actually make them run out of mana. It can prevent them from doing that. But really all that is with mana drain is an extremely bad silence, right? Now this mana, if that's what you want to do with your mana drain, all you're doing is silencing someone once every 5 shots of the ability as opposed to every time, which is weird. Right. And the other thing it can do is force them to leave lane or go back out of base. But it just does that in a much more frustrating way than just dealing damage to them, and also in a way that's useless a lot of the time. So like, Mana Drain as an ability on its own would not be a good ability. Like, it would need to do a lot more things for it to be powerful enough to be in Smite. Like, it would just not be strong.
And if it was powerful enough to be on its own, it'd be infinitely frustrating.
Right. So
Infinitely
really
frustrating
just
or
a damage
easily
that
countered,
silences, a good skill shot that damages and silences would be the same thing, but actually effective as opposed to only effective 1% of the time.
Right.
So we've talked about this a lot of times. We've tried to design the best type of ability that would fit this, and it really works better as like a flavor, or like if the character fits it really well, it could work, I guess. But when you're thinking about just the actual design goals of what a Mana Drain would do, there's not really a reason to have one.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
also, just a mini tangent, because there's also, I saw a few questions about like XYZ ability. Oftentimes, because we talked about that brainstorm process where you get a whole bunch of different departments. If you don't think like a whole bunch of ideas that are commonly suggested aren't in those brainstorms, it'd be crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, it's for a lot of characters is like find the cool hook that is really unique and interesting, and then build around it. And a character that like jams 3 or 4 of them in that are like new mechanics can often just get really strange. And so a lot of the kits that get boiled down to are kind of a new mechanic or a twist on the mechanic with some support around it. But the ideas that like people are throwing out almost certainly have been pitched at some point.
Yeah. So Mana Drain, that's our thoughts on that.
Yep.
No, it makes sense. And all you have to do is buy 1 meditate and it's useless. What else? I saw another one in here that I really liked.
Items that fill gaps you don't currently have. I mean, this is easy. That's our goal whenever we. That's 100% our goal. Whenever we do, designing items that do the same thing that we already have in the game is silly. So
gods, anything, designing anything that does something that's already in the game is
yeah. It looks like they had a more specific question. Anti-heal or protection.
Yeah, it seems like the question.
I don't
there
understand
is
what the question.
ensuring the counter build options are good enough to prevent a character from doing something, right? Like if you build, that's anti-heal is like the biggest example of this, right? Where if it, like anti-heal shut down a mechanic, but it can't be so powerful because those characters become useless. But it also can't be so weak that when you buy it, it was just better to build a damage item. And so you have to find like that balance point where these counter items that exist have to do the thing that they're gonna do, but they can't give you everything that you want. And that creates some tension in your builds, right? Like, do I want to shut down the Hebo that's bursting me, or is that hunter who is just shredding me completely? Do I build physical protection or magical protection? And for a lot of Smite's history, it was actually you build both because the defense items are so good they just gave you both prots and health, which results in like tank metas.
Right. That's more of a balance. Is my mic working again? I saw some chats.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
no, you're good.
That's more of a balance question than a design question, right? So there's 2 very separate parts of the process, as much as they seem like the same. So like finding out the goal of the new item and what its general role is something we could do, and we can make it do that. But then tweaking the numbers to the point of, oh, it's not so good at doing that and other things that it defeats its own counterplay purposes, right? So that's more of the balance issue. So we come up with the design first, and then we work on the balance later.
Hakisimo, there is a visual indicator when somebody's anti-healed. Maybe have you guys ever thought about making it more noticeable?
Green. It's generally described by these green downward dropping particle effects on the opponents. Pretty much all anti-heals have that on them. Again, yeah, maybe we could have something. We have the CC icons where you see a smaller icon by their name attached to more of the UI. Can maybe do things more like that, but then again, we risk information overload, so we have to be careful and choose our visuals carefully.
Yep.
Oh, from like Pestilence, I think Pestilence is the only example.
Pestilence Aura.
Aura, we don't do Aura visuals. Because the rules. I mean, this is a fun thing to talk about, I guess. Every item can't have particles on the characters, or we would look like we're playing some sort of confetti simulator. So we have to pick specifically which items are going to have particles. Auras, the rules are relatively simple, and you can know from the tab screen who has auras, and so the learning process for the auras are pretty clear that we feel it's redundant to remind people by putting particles on them that they're in an aura. Like Mystical Mail does that, I guess, but it doesn't put things on the character, it's just on you. The pulsing, which we like, but we don't have any we don't have any current design intent to like make Sov put shields on all of your allies when they're near you all the time, because there's enough feedback and there's enough learning, and you could play off that with the way it works right now without causing too much clutter.
I saw another question I liked in here. Hang on. Who's the least played god right now?
Oh man, hold on. I just upgraded my stats to 5.5, so it's not as
Yeah.
accurate because it's a small.
It's Opwatch. I know it's
Small-
Opwatch.
It's
I will also
So
note that
first off, this question you have to choose your parameters, right? Are you saying just PC Conquest, or are you saying the entire game?
The entire game, all of Smite, who is
all platforms.
all platforms,
I
all
have it, I have it.
aggregated. Who?
I have it pulled up. I have it pulled up right here.
The infamous
So
stat sheet.
I have it pulled up right here. This is a different stat. Man, I don't want to say
Jeez, he
that.
comes home from work and he starts working again.
I pulled up the stats just in case we would need them. So careful. I'm going to discount Achilles because he's not been in the game long enough to.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is last 6 months.
Yeah. So across all platforms, it is Terra right now.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, this god
That
had
makes
some
sense.
difficult balance points. We had to make we had to make big nerfs to her. And that generally results in this. Like the god was not overwhelmingly popular from the beginning because it was very supporty. So supports a slightly less popular, and then supports that do very little damage and are very support even smaller piece of the already small piece of the pie.
And then are on the negative end of balance are even smaller in the smaller piece.
Well, her balance is actually quite strong still, but we can talk about that later. You've seen her in SPL now, so I have something to show people, and they can use Smite GG. But she's stronger than people think. She's just unpopular because I think we took away things. So, spoiler alert: we have some heavy adjustments for her coming soon that we're working on right now. So hopefully we'll remedy those issues.
Quick question: yes or no answer is fine. You guys ever thought about bringing back a golden bow-like effect for assassins or melee characters?
Thought about it, yes. Are we actually going to do it? Most likely not. I have a blog post about it if you want to read more.
Yeah.
Yep. There you go, Soul Train. I got you, buddy. I'll get the blog post
I've seen
link
him
from
only
you.
spam it 1,000 times. So
I know. I love Soul Train, so I want to.
I'm not afraid to answer the tough questions.
Sure. I mean, it's not even a tough question. I mean, it's a yes or no, right? It's just, and I kind of get it, right? Like I played gods that excelled with Golden Bow before, both in the ADC lane and in the jungle, and it just doesn't feel like they need it right now. I mean, it's not.
I mean, Mercury is doing the best he's ever done. He does not need it, right? He was the only god that ever really justifiably needed it in a health. He doesn't need it right now, so why would we bring it back?
Yeah, for a lot of these questions that are like, hey, have you guys ever thought about this XYZ ability? I don't know if you guys saw the 420 patch, but there's a long creative process where these guys go into a room, turn off all the lights, and think about abilities. So I guarantee if you come up with it here in 5 minutes of watching this stream, somebody over there has gone, bro.
No, I don't necessarily prefer that type of messaging because
I'm messing with them.
Yeah, I know he is, but I would like to just say too that I like people suggesting things and designing their own things, and we read those and we get inspired, and it helps us come up with ideas, and things the community comes up with often don't work in a one-to-one, but yeah, with a little tweaking and stuff like that, we do get really good abilities.
James Final Form, I am not going to nerf Midgardian Mail. These guys might, but I definitely won't.
We already did nerf Midgardian Mail.
Yeah,
by the way. We did nerf it.
It's 3 stacks at 10%.
And I don't know why people can say that's definitely not stronger than it is already in life. We just got rid of the RNG, so yeah.
Why can't we see the health and mana bars and enemy icons and upper section of the screen where they're not in Fog of War? I have no idea.
I assume that means because on you can only see enemy health bars on the in-game space, in-game world. Yeah, on the top right, you just see their portrait and level.
Yeah, that's specifically the way that we want the game to work, right? We don't want you to be able to see that information unless you're in range of them,
right?
Or have vision.
Well, I think he's saying that if you have vision of them,
right? If they're on a ward or if they're
then it's
in a
just
tower.
Redundant.
Yeah,
then we're just showing the same information twice, which we generally try to avoid.
That's a good point. Ever thought about reducing Vamana's 2 and 3 costs? Snappier Will has been asking all night. I have a feeling he's a Vamana main.
I talked about this at lunch.
Yeah, no, of course we talked about this. He is one of the clearly high mana costing abilities from the old days. We talked about it for sure.
Right.
We were actually careful about doing that during his last balance pass because lots of the people we were talking to, competitive casters, had thought he had potential to be like the best jungler in the game if he had slightly lower mana costs. And we saw today that he's one of the best junglers in the game. Homie Effie did work with Vamana. So
yeah, I gotta be honest.
We won't do that.
Weekend and I have been playing together, and he's been running it in the jungle, and he's absolutely stomping the holy hell out of everyone.
A good thing
to note, got like a triple kill in the first 3 minutes.
A good thing to note about this change is although Vamana's appear inconsistent, that doesn't mean that it's not an okay way to balance the character, right? Like just because his mana costs are higher than other warriors, you can't just say, oh, that's the thing you should change about him, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, generally we do like to make things consistent in some ways, but not every way, right? So that's one we I would say has a likelihood of being fixed though in the future.
Yeah. So here's a decent question. Why is there a magical anti-heal defense item but not a physical one?
So there's lots of examples of that in the game, actually. Yeah. So we don't need perfect symmetry like that. Like same with like Voidstone. Like there's not a physical Voidstone. There's similar items.
You mean like Void Shield?
Yeah, but that doesn't decrease magical, right? Like imagine if you could buy.
Oh, I see what you're
saying. If you could buy a physical power item with magical protection and a magical protection like debuff or look. Things like that, which I guess you might want to support your team. Like obviously that's less intuitive, but there's plenty of asymmetrical things in the game. Some of them are similarly. Void Shield and Void Stone are similar in what they do generally, but they're not literally physical magical components of each other.
Yeah, and I think there's also just a difference in physical, like this is probably diving too deep.
Runic Shield decreases the other enemy's power, not their protection.
Yeah.
So it's not the same, right?
You can't benefit. Yeah, you can't benefit from decreasing the magical protections of a character because you're buying this as physical power. You can benefit from not taking as much damage, right? There's the difference there.
So although these items seem really symmetrical, they're not the same.
Yeah, they have slightly different purpose cases. But like physical protection and magical protection, they might seem like stats that are just like two sides of the same coin, but Smite has differences in like how team comps are built because there's 5. You generally run 3 physical, 2 magical. There's tower damage. There's objective damage. They're not perfectly treated as equal. Same with physical power and magical power. The amount that you get is often different, and that can tweak things like how much scaling you put on item and make it okay. Like for example, oh geez, what is it right now? I want to say Crusher. The amount of Heartseeker. Heartseeker is 80%. On its proc, but for example, Soul Gem is 40%. But they do roughly the same damage on their proc because of how they're treated. They can't just be treated equally. So it often comes down to what is this item's purpose, what is its build case, and how does that stat relate to other stats.
So when people say, I mean, I guess anti-heals is something a little widely applicable, but we don't necessarily want a magical and physical version of every unique item, right?
Right.
Just be redundant in some cases, or just like in the Void Shield example, it'd just be bad. I guess you would play it if you were playing a warrior support with a heavy magical team, like with a mage ADC and a mid laner. Like then you might want that penetration magical damage aura, but with physical power. It's weird, but my point is, it's okay to have those asymmetries, and we're not necessarily trying to force those. Any thoughts on silence on a relic? That's something we've tried.
Yeah,
we've tried that. It's really frustrating to do that to players. It's either Sunder is a really difficult to balance relic. Obviously, skill shot relics that are really risky generally have to be way overtuned before anybody will want them, because you just have too much chance of them doing nothing. And then if there was a silence with no aiming, that wouldn't be fun either. If it was like a giant AoE silence, like that would be extremely overpowered, and most likely. So we generally try to watch out with relics. Adding new relics is something we're very sensitive and careful about. You can see we've only done it a couple times, and it's been very hard to find new relics that work well because there's so many possible interactions with them.
Why are there so few magic ADCs in the game?
Oh, that's a fun one.
Yeah,
because they are fun to play. I'd say Freya was my second god I ever played, and I loved her to death. My dog is named Freya. No, I'm not even kidding. I'll call her in here. I'll show her to you.
We like magical ADCs from a design perspective. They are good for diversity. They're good for balance. They give you more counters and more checks and balances. But that doesn't mean we need a ton of them.
Yeah,
I guess I would say the 3 that we have already can cause a lot of balance problems with very slight changes.
Right.
So we're careful to add
Freya.
more. Yeah, Freya, Kronos, and Sol. Yep. So I wouldn't say that it's off the table. I mean, we definitely might add one at some point. It's just not a super high priority.
What are you guys' thoughts on Kronos' early game?
Kronos is a late game god.
Yeah, he's a late game god. Like, there's a few characters who kind of muddy the water between early, mid, and late, and then there's a few that are like very clearly defined as early, mid, and late. And Kronos is just a very late game god. He does have one thing going for him in the early game, which is a very low cooldown, decent clear. Like, if you want to just focus on like grouping up the minions and dealing some damage multiple times, he can actually be pretty aggressive, if not just a bit mana consuming. So he has tools in his kit that help him survive the early game. But he kind of has to not have the best early game because his late game is so good.
Right.
And, and that kind of stuff also means that like you're adding depth to like the decision making that you have, right? Like by picking Kronos, you're making a statement of what kind of style you want to play, and especially at the competitive level, that's really interesting to see.
Shout outs to Smite GG too. You can go check the stats there, and they do have a pretty interesting early and late thing. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the same way we would calculate things or that it's perfectly right, but it's interesting. And I'm looking at it now, and Kronos is actually pretty mid-game, even skewing a little bit early, and I think that's because he turns on real strong when he gets that couple first few items.
Yeah.
Yeah, two items in, and he's swinging.
Yeah, so that's a cool thing about the god, but
I would say he's I mean, I've played him in mid and in jungle and all over the place, and he doesn't seem like he's as weak as everybody thinks he is.
Well, we just buffed his early game heavily by increasing his basic attack damage. We increased his level 1 basic attack damage, so that helped it a lot. So.
Yeah, I think it matches hunters now.
At least for me, it had more to do with his ability to reduce his mana cost early and just blow shit up on a 3-4 second cooldown, right? Like, you know, you pop your 2, and then you can 3-1 a camp, and you know, you waste no mana clearing. You gain health and mana by clearing camps as opposed to losing it.
Someone just thought the Discordia apple was a bug, spamming I am the greatest. Yeah, that's a design flavor point, because whoever has the apple is the greatest.
Klaus, that's literally intended.
Yeah, that's intended. It's a feature. It's part of the fun. It's a bit of a flavor to it.
Yeah, Achilles actually has that, but I don't think anyone's noticed. It's because it's the chance of it happening is so rare.
All right, I've been playing since beta, ranked gold, and I still get people who are just playing the game in Conquest. I assume that means Conquest casual. It might be Conquest ranked. So just for quick matchmaking discussion, if you're a really experienced player and you're a really good player and you get a very new player in your game, that's obviously not intended. I mean, that happens when new players will eventually get a match. That player which is having a hard time finding a match. It's not intended, but it's part of the system that does happen when the new player can't find a match. So that's generally what's happening if that's the case. But keep up with our new changes to matchmaking, and hopefully we can reduce the amount of time that happens.
Yeah, guys, definitely read the blog posts and stuff about matchmaking that these guys have put together. There are going to be some changes.
UI updates,
futuristic UI updates.
What's up with Nike Alt going on cooldown? Oh yeah, we've talked about that one a lot. It's not lag. We do specifically choose to put some abilities on cooldown at different stages in the effect. We can see this all throughout Smite. It's maybe something we're a little inconsistent on and we should revisit. But the thought was Nike gets a big benefit of that immediate CC immunity, whether or not her shield goes off or not. Similar thing used to happen with Khepri, where he could start casting his ult but could die. So we changed the timing on that one. So maybe we could change it on Nike.
Yeah.
What are the thoughts on changing Terra's 3 so the center roots and the outside slows? Is it kind of like a Erlang?
I don't want to spoil Terra because we're already working on pretty heavy changes for her.
All right, awesome. Love to hear that. She's going to be
but
stupid
I'm not a
strong
huge fan
again.
of that specific suggestion. I think it would be difficult to convey visually.
How do you punish hackers? By banning them.
Yeah, they get banned.
Yeah, it's pretty aggressive with how it bans them too.
Can we get a Chibi Ares? Ask Chuck.
Chibis, we already said floaters. Gods that fly are much easier for Chibi because we changed their proportions so heavily that making them run and still fit on the ground and fit their hitboxes and stuff is really tough.
Right.
So, yeah, Chibi Ares unlikely but possible.
Could you make a Chibi Ares and put him on a little horse, like a pony?
I mean, it might be easier to just have him like higher off the ground, like floating, I guess. But then we would feel strange about it. I don't know. I'll tell you, we have a more complicated Chibi in the works, so get excited for that.
Good stuff.
But it is a lot of work.
Here's a personal question, and this is somebody who I actually have. I've been playing PC for almost a year now. I have more hours on console still to this day than I do on PC. How do you guys like take into account the different mechanics between console and PC when you're designing or balancing the game? Because like I could tell you the meta is completely different on
The
PlayStation.
actual balance numbers aren't so different. There's a few exceptions that move around, but overall,
Like Zeus,
That's
Zeus I could
pretty
think of
close.
is like feels like he's so much stronger on.
I used to have that. Let me see. I have that stat pulled up, I think, still. If we want to look at it.
why is doing that? I can kind of answer the like design for console versus design for PC.
Yeah,
As a goal, it's making sure both feel good. PC, you have a lot of freedom to like instant 180, but on a lot of other characters, you don't have that ability to instant 180. For example, Kerberos, he was one of the things that like was in his early stages where his ult would like immediately flip people, like it'd pull them and immediately go.
Mhm.
But when you did that, it was really good on PC because you could hit people and immediately flick around and throw them. But on console, especially if your sensitivity wasn't even remotely high, like you had to go way higher than most people use to actually get that kind of same gameplay feel. And so that's something that's taken into consider is what timing do you give things? How do you let people, like, where do you let people do things? What kind of things are harder to do on console? It doesn't mean that like we won't do a mechanic because it's harder to do on console, but we'll often make sure that it's good enough so that people can utilize it, so it's not just a wasted skill.
Right.
Yeah, there's two parts to this answer really. Is one, we try to design the gods so their abilities actually just work on either platform. And I'm talking about from like the core, just bringing up the targeter, aiming, firing it. We always test that. The designers have to test that on console, for sure. We want to make sure that feels good on both platforms. And then the second part of the answer is, yeah, the meta is different between the platforms, and we're just okay with that. Like, that doesn't really make us upset.
I think it makes it more exciting, right? Like
It's cool, yeah. We don't think that it's worth trying to implement some sort of like different balance where gods that are good on console get bigger nerfs on console and not on PC. Like that's much more complicated, and people would get confused, and the games would feel too different from each other. But so we're pretty happy with that. You want to know the gods that perform the most differently between console and PC?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great to understand. That'd be great.
So I'll tell you just like one or two. And I haven't refreshed this data in a little while.
I bet you Serket sucks on console.
Sorry, fiance's going to bed, saying goodnight. Yeah, so Serket is the god who has the biggest difference between PC and console. She goes.
This is why you should all follow me and follow me on Twitter.
And the god that gets the best between, that gets the most amount better between PC and console is Hades.
So,
but they, like I said, this is them talking about their relative PC and console. This isn't like their relative performance in the entire pool of gods. Like, yeah, maybe Serket is much worse on console, but we still see her get played in like console pro games and stuff like that. She still can be pretty good. And the differences are not as drastic, like Pon mentioned before. People think they're very big. We're looking at fractions of a percent.
Interesting.
So they're not as big as you think. But
this was from Envy. What's your thoughts on the Hammer Tree, Blackthorn, Frostbound, Runic, Runeforge? Sorry.
This is a Pon question too.
So the Hammer Tree has had a rough time of it. Frostbound's been whatever. It's been good.
Frostbound's always been good.
Runeforged Hammer and Blackthorn Hammer have been redesigned probably more times than I'd get the number wrong. I do think Runeforge is actually pretty good. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Percent damage increase is really good. You just have to pair it with certain characters. It could maybe get some love in cost, or could get some love in other things, but it's not far off. Blackthorn Hammer was also an item that like we tried to give it some identity, and it just never really had that identity, that flavor feel. I think it now has that flavor feel where you basically have an infinite mana regen when you're underneath a certain threshold, but you have CDR when you're above it, which is really interesting to have, but it might not just be powerful enough to use. So I think the core problem of Runeforged Hammer and Blackthorn not having like a real cool identity has been largely solved personally, but there might be some number tweaking that makes them a bit better. I don't know how AJ feels about
Pon
it.
was being a little safe, I think, in his answer, because talking the other day, and he was like, "These items are."
He
But
cut
people,
out.
That was cut out.
That was cut out the whole thing.
Oh yeah,
That
It
was
might
beautiful.
be. It might be your mic peaking when you talk a little bit louder.
maybe.
Move it away a little bit, but that might help.
So, am I good now?
You're good. It sounds great.
Pon was
Yeah, I
saying
actually
that
think
these
Runeforged is
hammers are pretty strong. So we just, a lot of times we have a tough time getting people to get outside their comfort zone and like experiment with some new items. So sometimes items who are relatively strong, they stay dormant for a while. And I think the Hammer Tree is really, I think we did a good job with Blackthorn with its new stats.
You guys added like 5 power to Runeforge. What was it, the end of last year, or middle of last year, and then everybody built it on every god. Like I remember.
Yeah, things like that happen.
Yeah, and a lot of the time it actually happens because like we'll like, okay, this item we think is good, we have reason to believe it's good, but people start building it. Let's give it like a little love tap, and then the love tap, people build it and go, oh man, this is really good, and suddenly it's a core item. We have to nerf it harder than.
Oh, I know. I built it on Arachne and just raffle stomped everyone. It was great.
Oh, nice. This is Envisionized question too. Met him at HiRez. He's a really nice guy.
He also streams on HiRez TV. Very late at night.
Yeah. So, what else is up? Thoughts on Rama and foliage? This is a fun one. Yeah, this is intentional. This is not
Rama
something
and
you should treat as the bug.
What?
Yeah, like aerial ultimates. There's things in the map that make you block your vision. Like that's part of the game.
Yep.
We completely are cool with that, and we completely intend to keep it like that. So that's the same for Thanatos, Thor, Rama, whatever. It's part of the skill factor of playing the character to try to predict your opponents or have vision or have allies help you hit that.
Yeah, and early on with the map, I talked with Matt, who was working on it at the time, and I was like, if I ult here, I have so much vision, but if I ult here on the order side, I have no vision. And so they actually did a lot to make sure that like ulting from the symmetrical positions on each side of the map, you have similar expectations of vision.
And what we do try to avoid is when you ult and you actually go inside of something, like, and you're really blind. Like we do try to avoid that. If you that, let us know. But for the most part, when I'm talking trees and stuff on the ground obscuring your view, that is intended.
Oh, you mean like when you would Thor ult when you're defending a Phoenix in the old map, and you'd be like up in the rafters inside of the
yes.
Yep,
pretty sure we changed those
so
that you can't do that anymore. Although I'm sure you can get close and get some pretty unfavorable camera angles, but yeah.
How hard is it to balance global ults? Difficult.
Some of them are harder than others. Terra has been an example of one that's very difficult to balance. We keep nerfing it, and it's really, really, really good.
Adrena's coming in with the fire questions, by the way. I want to make sure we get to this one.
All right, bring it up.
And we'll go back to the global ult one. I just want to make sure I don't forget about this one.
I don't think there's anything that's specifically different about balancing global ults. It's not that different from other abilities. We have the same strategies and same numbers to tweak. It's more about abilities that don't have numbers to tweak that are harder.
Yeah.
Like Calder is a lot harder to balance than Thor ult, because Calder is really complicated and has a whole bunch of interconnections in Scotty's kit and stuff like that.
Thor ult could just go further or do more damage. That's really
exactly.
There's no on like ults, global ults. If you look at all their cooldowns, they're longer. That's very much like a way for balancing them, right? If they can globally respond to like an ultimate level gank, but they can't do it a second time, that's a big deal.
Right. So this question is from Adrena. So have you ever considered, this is a big quality of life thing. I don't know how much console you guys play, but like Rama, at least in my opinion, from like an ultimate perspective, is one of the most impossible. His ult is one of the most impossible skills to use on console because the target is so small. And generally, if you're playing well enough on console, you use a higher either X or Y sensitivity so you can snap around real quick, or you could toss things out real fast, right? And so the question is have you guys ever thought about allowing players to either apply accelerators or decelerators on the XY axis to certain abilities? Like, could I, is there a way, like, maybe I've got like 30X sensitivity and 25Y sensitivity, but there's a drop down underneath the ability that says, high acceleration scaling or low acceleration scaling or something along those lines. So yeah, it's great when I'm trying to juke and shoot autos and things like that and everything feels fluid, but when I go up in the air, maybe the targeter moves a little bit slower.
So first of all, definitely come to us with your suggestions about console quality of life and stuff like that. Make Reddit posts.
Yep.
We love to hear this kind of stuff. This is super interesting idea. This is definitely something we've talked about, but something that's a lot more difficult to implement, and that even more difficult to actually use well, I guess I'd say. But I wouldn't definitely not say this is impossible. It's something we could think about and talk about.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I'm just thinking of it in my head, and like this is really, and as somebody who's put in a lot of hours on console, like it's like Scylla ult, Osiris 2. I mean, unless you're like max ranging basically everything, it's really, really difficult to be super accurate with that stuff.
Yeah,
and,
it feels like the question is, how would you do something like this so that it's easy to use and understandable in how it's used and accessible to everyone, but also not being incredibly dev costly intensive.
Mm.
But
No, I mean,
it's a cool idea, and I'm trying to think of ways to make it work right now.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's no, it's definitely a good idea. Let's put it back through the discussion of we have 100 million things we want to do to the game.
Sure.
Why should we do this one right away over other things? So that's just a tough thing to do. We choose as many as we can, as fast as we can. So, I mean, put this one in the list, right, Pon?
Yeah,
it's pretty good. It's a pretty cool idea.
Just so you guys know, I know somebody who lives right down the street and is really experienced with console play. So,
well, we did send out we were looking for a full-time job. Are they already working?
Definitely not. No, I'm definitely already working.
Oh, it's you.
Yeah.
Oh, I get the joke. I thought you actually had someone.
I told you to let me up playtest stuff. I would do it for you. But all right. Anyway, is the team considering any changes to late game Phoenix sieges?
We just did that.
Did one.
Okay, excellent.
That's in 5.5, right?
Awesome.
Yep, it is in 5.5. So the change was Fire Giant buff. Now base gives you, it went from 20 to 25% increased objective damage, and the structure damage. Sorry, I'm pretty sure that's correct. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Either way, and then the enhance went from 20 to 30. So now when you actually get the buff, you can siege into their base more successfully. Fire Giant is kind of the game ender. And there's a lot of cases where even with it, it was really hard to siege. It shouldn't be impossible for the team to defend, but they were being a bit too successful.
Right. 29 Freelander, will there ever see a cost of tier 1 boots go back to 300? A lot of players skip them now in their starting build. I think that's intentional. You're not really meant...
We're very happy with that.
Yeah, you're not meant to build boots 1, guy. I mean, that's like the whole thing. Like boots 1, I did a whole episode on this. Like,
yeah, this came down to cost. This came down to like there's a lot of discussions like what would starters cost, the new blessings, and it was like we have to make them expensive enough so that people can't just go like boots and every single potion in the entire game. If we make them too expensive, now people can't build tier 1s, and so instead of adjusting those costs, it's like, well, what if boots just cost 500?
Our main concern was in season 5, move speed was going to be stronger because the map was bigger. Too. So boots got a buff, big time. So we wanted to nerf them a bit too to keep them balanced.
Right.
And we're pretty happy with seeing a good variation in starts. Like boots 1 plus blessing is really not the worst start in a couple roles. Like, you know, you were saying mid, but it's pretty decent in specifically jungler, I guess.
Yeah, jungler's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing is you guys, it seemed like you guys wanted to discourage people leaving their lane early, and a great way to do that is by giving them a heavy punish when they leave, right? And if your movement speed's so slow, like you're either missing waves or something else.
Our goal was to extend the laning phase a little bit.
Right. Well,
which is did send, but yeah, you're right. This does a great job of that.
Yeah, you also kind of hit on the point of why boots exist, which is if everyone had access to high movement speed really early, everyone would just roam all the time.
Right.
Where them having to build into it establishes a laning phase for a bit of time until people all get them online, and then people can start roaming. That's kind of boots.
Yeah. But yeah, we're pretty happy with that, actually. Here's a funny question. What is the most balanced god?
Ooh.
Well, how do we even define that? Are you just
the god with the least amount of changes.
I was just going to look at stats, and both of the answers are terrible. I don't know if I can tell everybody.
Well, but... I think it's worth noting. Like, I think it'd be fun for you to say the stats because, like, the 50% does not mean balanced. It just means this character is 50% right now.
So
there's different expectations for characters, and the fluctuations happen.
This one is 50.04, the closest to perfectly balanced over the longest amount of time and across all platforms. So that's a weird stat, you know. We wouldn't necessarily use that because we have to pay attention to different platforms. We don't usually average PC and console together. But the most balanced 50.04, almost perfect, is Hebo.
Oh man.
I know
that's a console problem. That's because it's impossible to hit his 3 on PlayStation, so you lose all the time. He's just an alt bot.
Maybe. You want to know the second closest? It's even funnier.
Oh no.
Freya.
At 49.95. Again, this is like we're pretty much drawing the lottery. This is not necessarily a stat we would use. It is Loki.
Yes.
I'm done. I'm out.
The most balanced god in the game across all platforms.
Is Hebo and Loki? Oh my god.
Hebo and Loki. But like I said, disclaimer again, we don't normally average together like performance stats over this or anything. Like performance stats are very important to look at in their context. So please don't take this as anything too serious. But this is funny.
Shut it down. We're done here. That's it. Ajax is drunk.
From averaging some fun numbers together.
Please no. I was gonna say, like, the way I define balance, at least in my world, is like the god whose kit through all the meta changes and all the shifts and everything has not been changed, but still maintains a reasonable win-loss rate, right? I mean, I think Loki is there.
Close to that.
Yeah, Loki hasn't
only been changed like twice.
Yeah, I think like they haven't. You guys haven't changed much about his abilities. The itemization has changed heavily, and he's still remained in the same spot, right? So that's interesting.
That was funny. Sorry, guys.
That's gonna trigger the hell out of everyone. I love that. So when can we expect Loki buff? No, I'm just kidding. Cool. Right. Hold on one second. I think we had one more.
So we could take a few more. I'm getting tired, but my fiance already went to bed, so it's like, you know.
I know that feels, bro.
Now we can hang out.
What about pre-selecting your role for rank, like League of Legends? I think you covered this in a blog post, Ajax.
I don't think so. I don't think I've ever really talked about this in detail.
Yeah.
It's definitely something we're looking into. I mean, it's something we've been interested in. It's just standard game design answer. It's a lot more complicated than it seems. So,
yeah, you guys ever played a game like Final Fantasy where nobody wants to be a healer and you sit there and queue for 25 minutes?
Oh man, I played Terra online, which is I had a massive problem with that. The Lancer class, the
yep.
tank.
I played a Lancer.
If you were a Lancer, you would insta dungeon anything. Like I was a healer, so I would get like 30-minute queues. But if you were DPS, you were like getting an hour plus queues.
Yeah, so, it's not as easy, and those are popular games too, right?
But there's ways to circumvent that. That's a design choice. We can fix the design, but the actual technical implementation of it is still a lot harder too. So
right.
Loki rework. I just said he's the most balanced god in the game. Why would we do that?
Ajax, what is the statistically best god for me to play when playing ranked?
I mean, go to Smite GG.
Oh, is it? It's Smite GG. Does it have it there?
It's almost always Nike. Yeah. If you go look at Smite GG stats,
Nike is up there. But in Smite GG, you can even by your division. So maybe if you're gold, okay, it's still Nike.
Yep.
But if
Nike is supposed to be the goddess of victory. It's literally the most.
Jesus.
But if you're diamond, it's also Nike. But yeah, you can see that. I love. I can't share my stats workbook with the community, but the community can create their own through these websites. So if you ever are more interested in game design, go take a look at those things. It's pretty close to the. It's similar to one of the metrics we use, but we use a lot of metrics in our internal stuff.
So personal question with like building. I think building is like the toughest thing for new players, right? Like, would you guys let's say your focus is more on making every item viable, or educating players on how to come up with their own builds or the most optimal builds?
Well,
that's a tough question.
I mean, they're obviously like two unobtainable things, right? Like,
popular does a good job, I think.
Yeah, the real thing is before Pon gets too roasted for that comment.
No, not recommended. Popular.
Oh, popular, yeah. Recommended. So the level of newness in this question is really important, right?
Right.
If you're really, really new to the game, you should really just auto build is close enough. It's more important to just actually have something that does something, and then the amount of optimization after that is you get diminishing returns, right? Like,
and you'll see
being
like
an assassin and buying assassin items is good. Building the perfect assassin items is a little bit better, not necessarily tons better, right?
Yeah, and you also see recommended often sneak in like a tank item that people are like, oh well, why would you do that? Well, making sure that you live it long enough to get a feel for like how a fight felt is probably really useful for a new player.
For very new players.
Yeah, for very, very new players. And then once you're ready to step out of that box, you've kind of taken upon yourself like, okay, I'm going to start learning now. And that's when you can look at community resources. You can look at the popular tab. And you can see what even other, like you could get completely destroyed by a build and go, that build seemed good. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, the popular tab is the next best bet because that shows you statistically actually what the winningest players in your god in your mode are building.
Right.
So just use that. I recommend players to do that when you get to the mid-tier stage, and then when you get to like the more advanced stage, then that's when you want to be following pros and like paying attention to their builds and their counter builds, because building is situational, right? So there's not just a perfect build for everyone every game.
Right.
And our goal still is diversity, like you mentioned. We want to make sure that lots of items are viable, but sometimes that means like they're only viable if the opponents have a healer, right? Like you necessarily shouldn't buy this unless someone is healing something. So you have to watch out for those. But it's good to have counter building, so we have to offset the new player experience a little bit, where they might accidentally build a counter item when they don't need to, but it's generally not the end of the world.
I thought this was a cool question. This is just an obvious god design question, but like, I thought this was neat. Thoughts on a god with 4 toggle abilities, for example, like Shibalanki 1, but they all have different like mana per second or mana per auto impacts.
You remember
right?
my design lesson earlier about going too far on things?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of it.
Well, I'm just trying to think what the WoW moment would be.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be as fun anyway. It's a novelty just for novelty. Confusing to most people. It would probably just
you just pop everything before you go into a team fight, and if you make it out the other side, great. Chances are you're probably not going to live through it, or if it goes for too long, you're useless.
Kerninos is really an example of that. Like we made a toggle. We made it the craziest toggle we've ever done. You toggle your toggle, right, through 4 different toggles. That's just a fun thing to say. But then the rest of his kit is fairly straightforward. That is good kit design. Like if every one of his abilities could be toggled 4 times, it would not be a fun character to play. Like, yeah, sure, a couple super hyper veterans or crazy unique like players on Reddit might enjoy it, but overwhelmingly to the rest of the population it would be a failure.
What do you think of Titans, Obsidian, Kin's passives? Design-wise, it's great, but their passives themselves aren't very intuitive or kind of overcomplicated. Envision A's.
Yeah, I saw Envision. That's a good question. The thing is, this is a perfect example of the earlier tool. We gave you the numbers because you should have them, but the general goal of the item is pretty clear, right? If your opponents have a lot of protections, buy this item. We don't really intend for you to know exactly how much penetration you're getting from them, like, because that's a weird calculation only when you hit different targets. So the general answer is, if they're building any protection items, it's better than a flat pen item.
Right.
We balanced it off of base protections, so I agree that it is complicated, but we don't really intend for most people to care about like the difference between 18.3 pen and 19.2 pen. They just know it's more than 10, which is what the other option would have.
We also wordsmithed that passive like 6 times, and that was like the one that conveyed the idea the clearest while also giving numbers.
So base damage is too high. I wrote a whole blog post on that. I can link that somewhere. But
you can also, if you want to see what a game's like when you have base damage that's way too low, Paragon is a good option. Oh, wait, never mind. All right. So, yeah, I know these guys can't comment on that, but I can. But anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, here's one for you, Ajax. I wonder who came up with this one. What about a vision? Actually, this is more of whether or not you've had time to think about it since we last talked about it. What about a visual or auditory cue when your enemy has more so much protections that it's mitigating most of your damage?
I don't like the damage number changing.
Well, like the damage number being a different color, or like a twang when like you're hitting armor. So it's something that says, hey, now's the time you got to build pen because you're not doing anything. Like your 200 damage is now becoming. Yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
60.
It's just yeah, it works better in Vermintide because theirs is much more binary, right? It's armor or not.
Right.
And certain things go through it and certain things don't.
I would say if there's a threshold.
Very complicated scale.
I mean, I think if you set it at like a
60% already.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just another one of those features that we could possibly do. We just have to prioritize and decide how important it is.
Yeah, what's more important, launching a new god or...
Isn't design for the masses kind of boring, though, since it discounts uniqueness? I think we find lots of uniqueness. Like, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah, what
today.
game are you playing?
We get criticized a lot for that, but I don't necessarily agree with it. We find uniqueness. I think uniqueness is important, though, to each COD to have something unique. But when you multiply that uniqueness times 5 across the kit, it just becomes noise. So it's important for kits to have something a little familiar in them, because that makes it feel like Smite. And then having something unique in them, too, is great.
How does it? It's also kind of conceding that you can't design for the masses and also make something unique, which that doesn't seem like a true statement to me, personally.
A good point.
Batbrat asks, how does a hitbox work in Smite? Is it literally an actual box or like a cylinder, or is it based off the physical model of the character?
It's not based on the model.
Yeah,
it's a box.
We have small, medium, and large. There might be one other like super large.
And Khepri.
Yeah, Khepri. Like Khepri might actually, I think, have a bigger hitbox than like Ymir. but it's pretty well set in stone.
Yeah, somebody was saying that
Yeah.
Khepri is the largest hitbox, which is why they measure things in the game based on like width of Khepris or something. I think it was in like the design for the adventure is it's like 300 Khepris wide or something.
No,
like that.
he is the biggest because he broke Gold Fury AI when he was being released.
Yeah,
Gold Fury had to
pathing.
have-
He can break pathing because he blocks too much area. So.
Question
Why do you
on somebody asked this a lot earlier, and I thought it was interesting. But have you guys ever thought about having the objectives change as the game goes on, right? So think of like, I don't know, I'm imagining like, you know, Fire Giant rides in from the sky on a meteor, right? Gold Fury is obviously less impactful late in the game. And, you know, would it make sense to have like, I don't know, like something fly out of the sky, eat the Gold Fury, and then all of a sudden like that's like a crazy buff that, you know, if you manage to get Fire Giant and that buff at the exact same time, it's basically GG. Right.
Well,
Yeah,
enhanced
like,
FG is like the simple.
Yeah,
version
we
of
did that. We did that.
That's like the
Cool.
base version of that.
Yeah, we like that idea. I mean, it's
because
something
I
you've
thought
seen
about
in
that. I mean,
games.
and it almost gives you like counterplay potential where like you say, "Holy shit, they're going for the Fire Giant! Like we gotta go get Super Kraken or whatever the hell it is, and that's the only way we're gonna be able to defend." And like I always thought that that was a really really cool question in my opinion. So,
Yeah, that's interesting.
ooh, did you guys hear that? That was the only comment. Was that's interesting. There's no rebuttal there.
No, I mean, something
No,
I'm
no,
just kidding.
yeah.
I'm just messing with you guys. I'm messing with you guys.
There's so much that like you'd have to consider with that. Like it'd be just a fun exercise talking it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I actually
will-
liked about like the season 5 map brainstorms that we were doing. Is oftentimes it was like we had crazy ideas and like we
Yeah.
just talk about like what the implication of that is and work towards like a solution. Those are really fun meetings.
Let's see what else we got in here. James Final. We already did.
Hunters. We
That.
already covered Hunters. We covered making the
you
game easier
rework-
for.
Do you consider to rework gods? This is another good one that I'd like to talk about. I have a blog post that's work in progress for reworks for like ever. But a couple things about god reworks, specifically old gods. In many cases in Smite are really successful still. Like they're performing well, they're popular, their kits are fun and unique. Like there's those. We would not do that. Reworks are reserved for gods with specific balance problems or extremely low popularity or high frustration. Those are the only times we do reworks. And then we want to be more careful with rework. Like you can compare us to League of Legends, but they're very different in their life cycle. They're not reworking gods to me. They're deleting champs and making new ones with the same name. In most cases their kit and their art is like completely different. I think that's something that our players would not really appreciate. Like if we deleted Thor, but then just remade a character called Thor that looks completely different, has a completely different kit. I don't necessarily think our players would love that. That's something we might consider later in life. But for now, we are looking at rework. There's some probably going to come up this year, but they're reserved for gods with those problems I mentioned.
Don't touch Kali. Don't do it.
I think Kali's pretty successful, personally.
I think she is too.
She's not really on. We have a short list of possibilities that she's not on that list. I wouldn't necessarily say she's immune to it, but
Don't take Kali away from me again.
we won't. We won't.
Old Kali was super fun back in the day.
Everybody wants to
Right?
know why
Yeah.
Fire Giant Meteor doesn't do damage.
Actually, you're not allowed to stand in that area, so you don't get hit by it. Maybe it could do damage.
Is
if
that why
get
you guys
hit
did the
by it.
pillar so nobody could stand on it?
Yeah. The intent was for no one to ever be able to, but I didn't like how the art was so short. It looked like you could run there, but then you couldn't. So I
Right.
was like, I talked to the environment team and I wanted them to make that very visually clear. So they they went above and beyond to make it really tall. They probably didn't need it that tall, but it works.
Was it a bug when I threw a ward over the wall and the Fire Giant deleted it because it was standing on it?
No, we have a feature where you're not allowed to play objectives. Generally, you shouldn't be able to place it, but if you do, I think we eat them.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was frustrating. I thought somebody was counterwarding me the whole time, versus old Fire Giant where it just wouldn't let you put it down, right? Like I think that was a small lesson that I learned the hard way. But you guys thought about adding more bans for ranked?
We talk about it every so often. Generally, it's like it's kind of a case of like how many are necessarily needed to cover the bases.
Yeah.
You can also see other games take different approaches to the amount that's there. I think right now you have plenty of bans in ranked.
Yeah, we generally think that more bans is just a band-aid like solution. That's not good progress. Yeah. That just takes more time. It's a patch. It's not the real fix. So we'd rather do more balance and adjust other.
For console, is there any way you guys could consider binding buttons to abilities and relics instead of preset controller layouts? That would be very helpful. I
Yeah,
remember that.
I mean that's something that gets brought up a lot. I'd say it's another thing in those look at all the time. I'm not sure if we're gonna do yet.
Buff Anubis, don't say that. Ajax will get excited.
I mean, what do you
Dude,
say, man? Anubis is already the best he's ever been.
Since he's been here, Anubis has gotten like 6 indirect buffs, and I don't know how he's not just crushing everything. I don't get it.
Because Anubis is still a god that has
Anti-heal.
counters. He's well
Sure,
designed.
sure. Yeah.
He's a great design.
But he's gotten like 6 indirect buffs.
Oh, and also you shouldn't refer to me as Anubis main, Wraith. Come on, you should say Goobus like always.
He is a filthy Goobus. Filthy Goobus, man. I've played one game with Ajax,
like
and
it.
I think you and I went something like 29-2 last season. Goobus Kali, and it was disgusting.
Yeah, it's fun stuff, man.
Any clarification? What abilities immune? Other abilities? Vertical height, Wheelix's backstep over Kukulkanal, etc.
Something we've been looking at. Generally, the art matches the hitbox, but not all the time. And we're trying to fix those areas where it's not all the time.
Yep. And the other thing is that we kind of went into it earlier that like it's really tough to put a lot of abilities, function, and everything else inside of just that little ability box and make it easy to consume for new players as well.
And in their example, Pon, a Willix backstep over Kukulkan alt isn't a backstep untargetable?
Yeah, you're untargetable. And
so that's not even a height issue. That's untargetable. So it doesn't matter what Kukulkan's alt looks like. That's just nothing can hit her.
I want to say that that's actually even in the tool.
Yeah, I think it might be. But for that Kukulkan alt, as far as like another common one is Poseidon. You can Kraken people and then wave them, like miss them with the wave. It's because the wave hits you, but the area above the wave doesn't.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I definitely done that before and been like super upset about it.
So yeah. I'm totally cool to keep talking, but I've had to pee for like the last hour and a half.
So, oh my God.
I will
Dude,
be right
rule
back.
one of podcasts is pee before you get on the air.
I'm good on bathroom, but I'm getting thirsty.
By the way, I appreciate you guys running over. I mean, this is already
no, it's good. I get to talk about some things that I wanted to talk about recently anyway, right? I still rather get them out in the blog post so I can reuse them better and stuff like that. But
sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a good format too. I like that this is more interactive too, right? Because like,
let's look at some more rapid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any type of plans to add movements boost to gods like Artemis or no? Not really, because those gods already have their pros and cons, and movement is one of the cons. And both of those gods are actually very, very strong and popular. Just because they're not in SPL doesn't mean they're not good.
Yeah, I think Artemis is stupid strong right now.
Can we have gods be damage immune, shine a different color instead of CC immune? Actually, I've experimented. We actually shipped like one console patch with some work in progress work to do things like that. It's tricky. It's part of my visual noise concerns. I don't want too many things. Damage immunity actually in the game is also really, really rare. So having a whole feature for it is not super necessary. Outside of like Aegis, Chang'e, Raven, we also have untargetable, which is a different state. It's not damage immune. So conveying that visually could be helpful too.
Mixed Gotrick, they never confirm any rumors about any god ever. So
yeah, I'm not going to confirm next god. Some people keep asking me for things about new gods. It's like if we haven't done it in a while, it's likely it's coming up soon, right? That's the best thing I can say about new gods.
What's one of the craziest ideas? I like this question, and I have a follow up off of this too. So, what's one of the craziest ideas you guys have had that's actually come to life in Smite?
Morrigan. We're still working on fixes for Morrigan.
Every patch. Have you guys hired somebody at this point to like QA Morrigan every patch?
No, we don't. It's not the QA. It's the code. And our most talented programmer works on Morrigan constantly. And the chances of her problems occurring is way lower than it was, but it still happens. So we're still trying to work on that. What else is pretty crazy, Bon? Scotty was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that was a big AI task.
Yeah, it was. So just making Calder actually work, like move and follow her and attack people, was way more than it seems. And then actually getting the design, which I think we did a pretty good job of, making a pet class that feels very pet classy, but not like boring, like an MMO pet class where you just sick them in AFK.
Right.
Yeah. I'd say adventures also, right? Just the entire idea.
Oh yeah, wow, yeah, we've done this crazy
where
stuff
we take the game and we tweak the rules and we do different things to make a different game mode. That's a new one comes out every so often, including a racing game. what other game can say that? Yeah, it's a PvP multiplayer MOBA, and also a racing game. It's kind of interesting.
Retired KFC manager, we talked about this. Any thoughts of updating descriptions on when abilities prioritized over another? There's just so many interactions. It's literally impossible.
Cool. As far as like all the things we like to add ability descriptions to, that's like 8 down the list. Like that's not even that important or consistent.
Which is, I mean, I think Flareboot does a good job with it in the Word of Thought, doesn't he? In his like big publication.
Yeah, these are more specific interactions based on hitboxes. Like, you know, Smash Brothers doesn't include that in the game. You just have to learn your abilities and your timings to get around people's attacks. So it's a similar process. This guy keeps saying Rama needs to spawn with a full quiver. It's like, hey man, last time we buffed Rama, the whole community said we were dumb for like about 2 months. So,
well, I think you guys are smart.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Here's my question. That was a follow up from one earlier. What's something that you really wanted to put into the game at the end of the day that you had to take out, but you loved?
I'm trying to think of any of my abilities I had to read. Gods I worked on. I'd say like I redesigned Kamazot's ult, but that's because it was just bad. The second one was way better. Same with Discordia. I guess the Discordia one was probably the most recent example. We really wanted to make this a thing where Discordia actually like changed the opponent's kit that she hit with her apple. And the only thing they could do is all their abilities would not work, but they would be able to throw the apple. And they could throw it to, I think, only allies for most of the design. And essentially there was this really long silence for the opposing team, but only one person could have it at a time. So you could like, you could be the support and like take it on purpose, or you could like, you know, pass it around so you could all fight. But it was just like, it sounded really cool on paper, but in practice it was just like not fun. And it just was a really long silence for one person. So
yeah,
it sounded really cool, but it didn't work.
There's a few like items, but none of them that I was ever so attached to. And for the character that I've worked on, Achilles, there wasn't anything that like drastically changed from initial design conception to him going out the door.
Well, any others you remember you were around for that we had really cool to take out?
Oh, Predator Stealth.
Oh yeah, so stealth just based on visuals, where we just make you turn your like skin invisible, like chameleon style.
Yeah, so
it just breaks with targeters.
Yeah, so Medusa. All of early Medusa's kit was something that I adored, but I would agree would not work because it was basically an assassin hunter. But she also had Predator Stealth, and the way this worked was you were like 98% transparent, so you really couldn't be seen. And this made it through one playtest. And the core issue is a technical reason. The way engine handles transparencies and how you render objects on top of each other just doesn't work well.
Right.
And so what it became was everyone would always have a giant targeter up and be sweeping. And then the second that Medusa cutout appeared, you knew Medusa was there. But it was also really fun to hide behind Tina. And I just followed Tina for 3 minutes. Because I was so far ahead, I was just like, I'm just going to follow Tina for 3 minutes. Followed her in lane, followed her while she was clearing things, and I was finally like, Tina, have you not seen me this entire time? She goes, what do you mean? I'm like, look really closely. After like 5 seconds of her like zooming in on the screen, she finally like screamed, and I just blew her up.
That was like hysterical.
That was like one of my favorite things. Didn't make it into the game.
Another one we tried a lot that doesn't work is counter attacks. So you could equate this to like a Smash Bros counter. We've tried to do this like so many times, and it's
Nem had it.
Nem, Hachiman actually had one too.
Yep.
It's just one of those things that seems cool, but it's one of like those other things I said. If as an ability on its own, it doesn't do enough, or it does too much. It's too situational. When it's really good, when it's really good, and it's useless all the other times. So I think we actually got really close on Hachiman. Fishman did a really good job, like trying all of the best possible ways to do the counter.
Yep.
We just kind of decided that those aren't going to work very well for Smite. Just the way our abilities interact doesn't make sense with counters.
Yep. Any plans to update clans?
Yeah.
We're doing some small features over the year, that some of which will touch clans, right?
Cool.
Yeah. It's definitely not forgotten.
Of course not. I mean, we're looking at a lot of out-of-game things throughout the year, so I don't recall the order of everything off my top of my head right now, but that's definitely towards the top of the list.
Console in-game text chat. I imagine that's low, since you could just message people.
I'm not really. That's one I'm not super familiar with. as far as the reasons why and why not we haven't done it. But keyboard support and being able to BM your teammates easier during the game is not something we're super into. So
yeah, I can tell you it would be more helpful for communication in game in some cases. I mean, obviously it's like 99% can be used for BM, but like I remember like having to go and find a PlayStation party and pull that and then send a message to everybody. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
But so people all commenting about reflecting projectiles. That's a perfect example of what doesn't work very well in Smite with counters. Like reflecting projectiles is not good. It's
how does raw 1 work versus raw ult work versus a Medusa basic attack?
Yeah, so like reflect basic attacks we could do, but reflecting basic attacks is really not very good anyway. What's the chance you're actually going to hit anyone with it? You might as well just block stack it. Again, it's over complexity. It doesn't apply to some abilities that look kind of like projectiles but don't work like projectiles. It just doesn't work well for Smite.
That's a cool question. A clan queue where you only play against other clans? I think it does that intentionally. Or it tries to. Or you're more likely to go against other 5-mans, which are clans.
Yes, we have waiting on parties, large parties, but
yeah,
clan queue,
I don't think clan actually is involved in that. It just happens to be that you often see 5-mans in clans together.
Having a clan queue on its own like that would be, I believe, a desolate, empty place. Too many queues. We don't want to add that. But that's a cool idea that we have some similar types of design that we're talking about, but not strictly limited to clan. Quality of life changes for the clan roster. We've been making fixes to that. I'm not sure what other.
That used to be so horrible. I had 1,000 people in my PlayStation clan. You guys finally fixed that. That was awesome.
Why did you get rid of the odd endgame arena? Yeah, that was just for that event. So the bonus round.
Clans and clan stores. Yes, they already said that.
Catch autos and then shoot them back at the chosen time. That's pretty much what Hachiman.
Yeah.
It was just not good. Like being able to block 1 auto and then shoot back 1 auto is not a whole ability's worth of an ability. Like that's the weakest ability in the game.
What if you could catch like up to 5 and then throw them all back at once as an ability?
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
And then you get frustrating, right? Something in between might have worked, and we tried a lot of.
And if your ping is above like 75, you're useless. Any thoughts at extending the lobby and planning time and ranked? It's already an 8-minute progress.
Yeah, we just cut it. If anything, we want to make it faster. If you're not making your decisions, like too bad. Where he reflects a percentage of damage taken charging. That's just Thorn's and Nemean line.
Anything on the new map that you wanted to implement that you didn't?
Some more small quality of life things. I had a whole bunch of eye features to better convey certain information. But it was, very, very small, specific things that took a lot of work, so we had to trim a lot of those. Still would like to get a few of them in, but it's tough.
When are we getting a new assassin?
I can't say.
I know. I want everybody to shut up.
Soon, wait, I mean, we were trying to think that Achilles would satisfy the assassin players. Like, he flexes pretty hard between warrior and assassin.
Yeah, he definitely does.
Assassin players, I hope, enjoy playing Achilles in the unarmored form in the jungle. So you kind of just got one, but if you want one that actually has the label on.
Any more productive questions? Or are we all just doing a bitch session now?
Why couldn't we have side camps like in beta? LOL.
Oh god, side camps are so. I can speak a little bit to that, right? Like side camps, they pull everyone away from the center, which means everyone doesn't fight. And Smite, you want people to fight. Not saying that you can't do sides where that isn't the case, but it does really pull away from the center. Like it was there in season 0, and it was removed for pretty substantial reasons.
I mean, the only thing that was cool about side jungles, and we actually did talk a bit, is duo lane lacking experience, like putting something small over there for them to kill to help them farm a little bit. It is the only like kind of realistic version we did. But the old ones were just the long narrow pathing. That's. Oh look, IGN totally asked when are we getting the Black Lotus God and Smite. That's a sick Magic reference. Dope reference, Tully. Your references are always. Everyone knows your references are so dope.
He's really forcing the issue.
Oh, rituals return when? Oh, that's Wombat. Pon asked that.
Oh no. Yeah, I know.
We're looking into some new. We still think that the late game, like high risk, high reward, hyper late game item space is definitely something we could expand into. rituals just missed the mark, obviously. So I wouldn't necessarily think we'd even call them rituals maybe if we come back, but we are still looking at that design space for sure.
You guys ever thought about like an item where like one person can get it and like it just was like
we've
super
talked
OP
about that.
and like
But that just
drops
wouldn't be fun,
on
right?
death and like I don't know.
That's going to guarantee 3 to 4 complaints from the rest of the team every single time the item is bought, right? You shouldn't have it, I should have it. It's just not good.
Yeah.
Why not make jungle camps more complex? I don't know. It's not really fun. We want you to fight each other. It's really
not the camps.
The complexity of jungle camps is about controlling the zone and the experience and rewards they get. Like having them kill you also doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, I think like the highest level of complexity you'd want to go is like they have a slightly different attack chain, or they have slightly different like one's a little bit more vulnerable to magic and physical, and the differences could be so extreme that it was crazy. Otherwise, you're trying to min-max against these NPCs versus fighting other players.
Any chances of a god being reclassified? Do you have any?
We did that actually.
Yeah, we did it once. With Hades. It's not really on the list again. I don't know who this
Nem was a warrior too, wasn't she?
Oh yeah, maybe,
too.
What about really magical like I don't want to say physical gods, but you think like a Quang, right? Like a magically
subclasses.
Yeah.
We've talked about subclasses before. It's something we might do eventually, but there's not enough gods to fit into those categories now.
Right.
And one of the advantages, we like gods to be flexible, right? We don't want to force you to tell you have to play this god here.
Well, I got my
try to Ao Kuang mid. I mean, go for it. Right?
I got my ass beat by an Ao Kuang solo 2 days ago, so I'm.
Oh, perfect.
Dude, I just did Cuckoo or Kukulkan in the jungle.
Oh yeah,
maxing my one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Won that game. You can play wherever you want.
Yeah, you blink one poly and everyone's dead. And
dude, his one poly is nutty.
It's just
no more hints. No hints around arena design. Just
guys, why would they come? They they spent the whole week going. All right, here are the hints we're gonna drop on Wraithen's stream this weekend. Like, why would they ever give you guys any hints here of all places? They have a patch that'll show a Tumblr and a Twitter. Come on.
Bringing back old maps is a.
You cut out.
Map.
Yeah, you cut out like the
whole sentence.
Sorry.
It's okay.
It's all right.
Rip my microphone.
It's all good, man.
That's funny. I've never had anyone tell me this problem. This is a lot more talking.
I think Discord's freaking out. By the way, I don't think it's you because like the cameras.
My friends have been having it in Discord too. But old maps is something we're interested in, but it's just another one of those things that's hard to do.
It's also tough too because like you're also peeling players away from the main game modes, right? Like,
well, yeah, you have to add the files, which is download. You have to ensure there's still support for it. Like, it's not like, oh, the map files are in, it's gonna turn on. Like domination is probably not the best thing to bring up, but like assume it was domination. If you were to just plug and play that right now, the game mode wouldn't launch. Like, it wouldn't work. You'd have to have someone actually fix things that no longer are supported.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about the current meta? There is never a set role and anyone can play anything. I just don't agree with that statement at all. I think the current meta is good.
Oh, I think
people can play flex, but there's not literally anyone anyway. What is my opinion of power creep? I mean, there are plenty of new gods that are plenty of old gods that are high performance. I think power creep is mostly in the community's mind, and it's when they attribute lots of things as opposed to strong things. Like, just because something does a lot of things doesn't make it super powerful. So I don't really think Smite has power creeped very bad at all. Every game does power creep too, but like, let's see.
It's kind of a natural consequence of trying to keep doing new creative things. And new creative things generally that weren't ever considered possible have different strengths.
Yeah. For sure.
But Smite has done a pretty good job where like old characters are continually picked and do well. In some cases are even nerfed.
Thoth, Nemesis, Dodgy, Hebo still getting banned in SPL. Those all got nerfed already. Like,
we'll
have to give them some time.
And the items that they use. So.
What god is worthy of a rework? It's definitely not.
Definitely not.
I've seen people suggest that before. He said, "What makes?"
You're cutting out
the rework.
You're cutting out way worse now.
Yeah, this is bad.
No. Oh no! Oh, we might have to just call.
Is that new like wireless headset that they were giving out demo beta versions of?
Oh, dude, this is my Corsair wireless headset. I've been using it for.
Oh, yep.
You've been using it for Blink.
Hey, you've been using it for far too long. Yeah, by the way, you guys have gone way over on the conversation stuff, so I really appreciate it. I don't want to discount that. No, I mean in like a good way. Like, I mean, everybody's getting their questions answered and feeling good about it. So,
yeah. As it intended, when you're perpendicular to Medusa, you still get petrified. Yeah, dude, you're probably at 89 degrees. Like, get a little further.
Yeah, and there's also
what Ajax is trying to say is get good. Ooh.
There's also a bit of difference. On your client, you can be a bit further, but if the server hasn't recognized you actually being that further, you can get some situations where you look like you're away, but you're not. It's the server rules overall. Server decided it happened.
Meta is dominated by God's release. No, I don't really agree with that. We had like a couple on a SPL match earlier this week.
Giannis has been around for a while, hasn't he? And he's like a top played god.
Season 2. Athena.
Geb or no Sylvanas.
Geb's
Sylvanas is 3.
Sylvanas pretty. Those are both pretty old. No, those are season 2.
Yeah.
Geb is even earlier. Geb is season 1.
I think. What are we seeing in the Soul Lane? I mean, it's just a bunch of guardians. I guess Nike apparently has the win rate of a monstrosity, but
yeah, I decided not to wear the Omicron just because it's not an official Smite version.
Wow, was that a dig?
Yeah, this is not officially
HiRez. No, HiRez. Sorry, HiRez.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is definitely officially a Smite production.
This is great. And I
yes. Welcome to the Plat Perspective. We're going to talk about League of Legends. Here I have 2 designers from Smite Game. Thank
not
you,
official
Ajax.
HiRez. Sorry, but I do wear it bust out sometimes anyway. Just didn't feel like it. I really like this shirt too. Cool pocket.
Pockets are back in, I hear. Let's see.
Loki's abilities from Shadow Heracropolis would be a cool kit for Loki. Don't want super balanced, but not too overpowered. Super popular. Loki, not really on the list of reworks.
Will Smite ever be upgraded to UE4? That's a cool question.
Yeah, that's effectively making a complete that just happens to look like feel like Smite.
Yep.
Yeah, the amount of effort that would. It's not like you launch Smite and compile in UE4. It's like there's so much work to be done. It is a new game.
Oh
Did
yeah.
you ever consider being able to buy more than one blessing? Actually, during most didn't add those, but we don't want people doing that.
Yeah,
it's just not fun.
Here's a question for you. I always thought it was a little weird that like if I bought the wrong blessing, I can sell it back and get a different one. That kind of like, especially with like how similar, I don't want to say similar, but Assassin's and Hunter's blessing with pointy things is. Like I've definitely like bought one over the other and been like, fuck, like I gotta go back and then realize you're totally screwed.
Initially, they were closer to the same color, and we changed that. So imagine if that went live.
Yeah. I mean, you get punished for buying the wrong thing and walking out of base with. Like, you gotta be careful.
Yeah, I could see a gold deficit, but definitely not like, you know, bork your whole early game, right? Like, I'd rather take less pots into the jungle, right, than start with a Hunter's Blessing.
Yeah, maybe we could make an adjustment to that. That would be a reasonable one. It's just
see, guys, I'm out here working for all of you.
Yeah, there might be solutions there.
Were we considering making Artia ranged autos? I think we talked about it basically, but not really. We brainstormed a little bit. We really just wanted her to actually melee autos, but actually felt magical. Seeing as all of our guardians have magical basic attacks, but they're hitting you with like axes and hammers. One of our goals with Artia was to actually make a guardian melee attack that felt magical, which I think we did a good job. Chuck did a good job on. Would you ever consider slight rework Artemis? Artemis is really strong.
Artemis is super
really strong, really popular. Not really on the list for rework. People just think because she's got no mobility that she's bad. It's just not true.
This kind of comes back to the point of like, just because a character isn't seen in the SPL continuously doesn't mean that it's not viable for like 99.9%, including Masters level ranked. Artemis can do well, and her stats kind of back that up, as well as
she's so good.
She's very popular. People like playing her.
A lot of people trying to rework gods that I don't think need reworks at all.
Well, I think it comes down to like I don't think this character is successful because I don't know how it would work at SPL. Therefore, it's not successful in my games, which just isn't true.
Yeah. Here's another suggestion for Ares rework his 2 and his passive. Those are his only defensive or his defensive abilities, and his aura and really fun. I love both those things.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really like Ares' whole kit. I think he's like a super stompy snowball god, right?
Ares is one of my favorite gods of all time for sure.
He's fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Multi-platform mixed play. All you'd have there is a bunch of PC players pissed off they're playing with Xbox players.
Yeah, it's a tough one to get into. Ranged autos on a warrior. We've looked at things like that. It's really like, I don't know, Pon. It's either a bad ability or the worst hunter in the game. It's the worst warrior ability. It's either the worst ability in the game because it's some like essentially multi-hit ranged ability, or it's the tankiest worst hunter because his scaling would have to be weak. It's just a tanky hunter.
Yeah.
So things like that sound novel, but in application, they're really just like, that's just like giving a warrior like a Thoth type multi-projectile, which would just be better than giving them ranged basics. It's not really any different.
What happened to visual reworks? Ask Chuck.
Visual reworks.
Considered a multi-pot that gave more mana than health?
We did one recently with the Aphrodite skin.
Oh,
yeah,
true.
those are skins. As far as gods in general, I mean, visual reworks are something we're not prioritizing as highly, I guess, this year. We find that the visual reworks get very mixed reactions. So there's a lot of people that just like the old gods, like as them to be updated. People really like the old ones too. So
people also don't.
That's kind of
care.
the same answer for skins too. Like for as many people want skin updated, there's a lot of people that like it the way it is.
Yeah, I'd also rather they work on like new stuff than fixing. I mean, like if you talk about like the average player, like most of them don't use the base skin anyway, right? Like so, like who cares, right? Like I can't think of the last time I used base model Freya before the rework, even though she was hideous. You know. So anyway,
all right.
I think we're gonna call it there, team. Do a little outro here. First of all, huge thanks to Ajax and Pon. We started this at 8:40. We are ending now at almost 11:40. That
has been 3 hours.
3 hours of Smite talk.
This happens every time we talk on.
Yeah, every time like I'm on a show, or like especially like with AJ, we did another one not too long ago, like 2 of them. They always feel like they're not that long,
but they're really long.
I mean, this is all like interesting stuff, and I think it's a lot of things that like people sit there and they question, and it's like, you know, there's so much coming in Twitter and Reddit, and it's hard to get your questions answered. So to like have you guys sit down and you know, I would say half of this whole session was just viewer Q&A and going into detail about the way you guys think. And I think it's also important for the community to understand how you guys are thinking, because it makes it a lot easier for the average viewer to kind of understand where you guys are coming from, right? Like, you know, we can all sit in our ivory towers and think like Pon should do this and Ajax should do that, but then you realize, oh, well, there's a lot more that goes into it than I'm thinking about. And when folks have the ability to do that, I think it's certainly helpful for everybody and for you guys. I imagine you get a lot less shit. But no, seriously, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for dropping in. Everybody who's watching at home, the VOD will be up on YouTube as soon as I manage to compile it and throw it up there. Leave your feedback. There will be a post on Reddit asking for additional feedback on the episode. I know it's a long one, so I appreciate everybody sitting through it. Your questions were great. I expected way more trolling, and you guys
yeah, that's really good, actually.
Exceeded my expectations. Make sure you guys drop a follow to Ajax and Pon on Twitter, at HiRez Ajax and at PonPonWeiWei. Or nope, PonPon Smite. Sorry.
Weiwei on Reddit, right?
Reddit, yeah. Sorry. At PonPon Smite. To keep an eye on changes to the game and anything they have. Make sure you guys drop a follow on my Twitter as well and on my channel, so you know when we do this again. And yeah, we'll see you guys for the next episode. It's going to be ADC, and I'm trying to get Barracuda and Taco to jump on and tell us about Hunters. So everybody have a good night, and thanks again to these two for all their time.
Thanks, Wraith. Thanks for everybody stopping by.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.